Good evening, and welcome to the June 18th, 2018 meeting of the Merrimack School Board. If you could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. And number 2 is public participation. If anyone from the public would like to speak, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. If you are a minor, you just have to state your first name and grade. Seeing none, I'm going to close public participation, and we'll go on to item number 3, which is the focus on the implementation of the elementary and middle school math program at James Mastrocola Upper Elementary School and Merrimack Middle School. So I invite to the table administrators, educators, and students. And welcome.
Good evening. I'm Marcia McGill, the principal of James Mastrocola Upper Elementary School, and I have with me this evening our assistant principal, William Morris, and our math facilitator, Howland Fitzgerald. Additionally, we have several teachers and students, and I'll quickly introduce them. We have Mr. Louis Mayo, a fifth grade teacher, and his students are Timothy Beavis and Maeve LaRock. We have Mrs. Fay, a grade 5 teacher, and her students, Michael Flara and Jordan McLaughlin. Then we will have in a few minutes Lisa LaBrush, a grade 6 teacher, her students Amaya Stubbs and Delaney Callahan, and Mrs. Garbars, a grade 6 teacher, and her students Chase Rowe and Holly Gordon. A year ago in August, we introduced a revised Merrimack School District math curriculum. At the same time, we implemented a new resource to support the teaching of the curriculum. The math curriculum is our instructional guide. The Envision 2.0 program is the resource we use to implement the curriculum. Envision Math 2.0 is a comprehensive program that provides the focus and rigor of the college and career readiness standards. The program is organized into clusters of connected topics and lessons. It is designated to strengthen students' abilities to think mathematically, to deepen their conceptual understanding. The program is personalized and adaptive, and it provides the flexibility of print, digital, or blended instruction. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to the JMU's educators and students. They will share with you what math instruction looks like at the upper elementary school.
Hello, and thank you for inviting us to be here. The math program has been very exciting for all of us, and I think you'll see that the kids think so too. When we're about to introduce a new lesson like this, the first thing we would do, this is lesson 10.2, they would have had practice problems from 10.1 last night. So as we begin class, they're comparing answers with a couple of friends around them and seeing if they had gotten the same answers for some of the problems. And as they find that they have the same answer, they can check with a couple of others. And I then ask for questions. Are there people that have different answers? And if there are, I'm able to project every page that's in their workbook right on my whiteboard. Put the screen up, and it projects right on the whiteboard. And if there were people that had different answers for a problem, we're able to work it together. We can use the math practices, starting with what do we know from reading the problem? And we start writing those things down on the board. What do we know? What is it we want to find? And we can make a quick note on the whiteboard of what is the question we're trying to answer. And by the time we're done, hopefully everyone has seen the way to find the correct answer and everyone knows who has. During some of that time, I'm also observing, asking for a thumbs up or sideways or down, and getting a feel for who might need to be in a little reteach group, things like that. So today, having already done that, we're going to introduce the new. And I wanted you to see what they see in their book. This is what their book looks like. And one of the first things we always ask them to look at is the I can statement. And when we think it's an important enough concept, we even have the kids chant it. So I would say, class, Why don't you go ahead and chant the I can together?
I can find the volume of rectangular prisms using a formula.
So in 10.1, they would have identified finding a volume by counting unit cubes and counting layers of unit cubes. And now we want them to move that on to finding an actual formula that will work for them. So at this point, I can show you that there's a speaker, and we can actually have the problem read to them. It's not going to work tonight because we don't have that kind of link access that we have back at the school. But at this point, it would read to them, Kevin needs a new aquarium for his fish. The aquatic store has a fish tank in the shape of a rectangular prism that measures 5 feet by 2 feet by 4 feet. Kevin needs a fish tank that has a volume of at least 35 cubic feet. Will this fish tank be big enough? Solve the problem any way you choose. And at this point, as it's being read, some of them would have already started solving the problem, and they would be solving it right in their book on the page. And then we always give them a chance because it's called solve and share. That's how we begin the lesson, solve and share. So after they've come to an answer, they will turn and talk to each other about what they did to solve the problem. And we're going to eavesdrop a little bit on them when they get to that point in a moment. That's Jude that's saying hello. He's already decided he wants me for 5th grade.
Quickly, while they're working, can I also introduce one other staff member that we brought with us? Lisa Hargraves is a special educator in 5th grade.
And at this point, we probably would already have written on the whiteboard that the actual question is this fish tank big enough? So go ahead and talk about your work.
So, go ahead, you can go first. So, I found that the length was 5 feet, and the width was 2 feet, and the height was 4 feet. So I knew that 5 times 2 feet, well, 5 feet times 2 feet equals 10 feet. And then I did the 10 feet times 4 feet, and I got 40 feet. And I knew that 40 feet was, I got 40 feet cubed, and I knew that 40 feet was bigger than 35 feet.
I did it a little bit differently. I did 5 feet times 4 feet and got 20 feet, and then I did 20 feet times 2 feet and I got 40, which was the same thing. And then I read in the problem that he needs 35 cubic feet, and 40 cubic feet is greater than 35 cubic feet, so that means he has 5 cubic feet to spare.
So, and any students that disagreed on the answers they found could raise their hand. We can solve it together as a class if we need to. Can we go to the next slide? Once they've shared about the solve and share, we do a visual learning piece, and we were encouraged by the trainers from Everyday Math to name the robot so that the kids kind of connect with that learning piece. So our robot's name is Pie Guy. And if you notice under the visual learning piece, there's a bar, and you can see a tiny little bit of red. They have the same information in their book, which is the green that you're seeing there. But as we look at the video, we were able to take 3 stills capturing a screenshot of the visual learning, so that as Pie Guy and his apprentice are solving the problem and talking about how you go about solving the problem, we can stop that video, we can have discussion, we can get an answer before the visual learning shows what the answer is, and then decide after we see where they go if they worked it the same way as we did, wanting them to figure out, as both of these children demonstrated, that it doesn't matter what order you multiply the 3 in, as long as you remember to multiply length times width times height, you're going to get the formula. That's the formula. You'll get the volume, but you can multiply pieces that you see easier. He saw 5 times 2, she saw 5 times 4, and it doesn't matter. And we want them to get that understanding so that when they work with more challenging problems, they know that I can grab the 2 that stick out that I spot immediately, and then I can multiply by the 3rd number. And so they have this practice, and once we have really beaten this problem to death and everyone's comfortable with how it works and that we can get the right answer anyway, we go on to Mrs. Fay.
Hello. Hi, on. So one thing I really appreciate about the Envisions program is the I do, we do, you do, the gradual release of responsibility. I think the sections of it are really set up to work well with that model. So a lot of what Mr. Bayo just talked about is a lot of the I do, really instructing them, and then we move on to the we do. So there's guided practice, which we start with. And I lead, the guided practice is really just the very top box of that page in their workbook, and we as a class work through those problems together. I may call students to come up and get input from other students as we do them and talk about why those answers make sense. So I'm still doing the kind of hand-holding and guiding there. And then I assign the independent practice, which carries on the rest of the bottom half of that page and the rest of the second page. The problems with the checks are problems that I could assign to really show that they have mastery and are able to do this independently. And as they are working independently, I encourage them, if they finish before I get around to check them, to check in with their peers on how they solve the problem. And I am going to have Jordan and Michael do an example problem independently and then check their answers together.
Well, I know that volume equals length times width times height, so I'll multiply 7 times 4 times 3.
How'd you solve it?
I did 7 times 4 times 3. What did you do?
I did 3 times 4 times 7, and I got 84 centimeters cubed.
I got the same.
And so they can bounce their answers off each other. What did you notice about how you solved it even though you have the same answer?
That even if we do different ways, you still get the same answer.
What do you mean by different ways?
Like, I did 7 times 4 times 3, while she did 3 times 4 times 7. It doesn't matter what sides you start with, length, width, or height.
Good. And how did you decide on the label for that problem?
Because this is centimeters, and it's a 3-dimensional shape, so you have to put cubic after what you label it.
Good. And then as they're solving it independently and checking in with each other, I'm going around and seeing who might need some reteaching. And so then, and moving on to the next stage of the stations. So I may take a small group, I'll take a small group of students that need reteaching, and then the students that are able to show mastery independently will move on to other centers. And this particular center that goes with Lesson 10.2 is tied in with STEM. It's a math and science activity. So they would partner up or be in a small group and discussing, working through the problem together. So we are going to have them do that right now. So you can read this problem out loud and then share what you would do to solve it.
Suppose you are an engineer designing a new oven for small spaces. A typical oven volume is about 4 cubic feet. Your new design is 1.5 feet wide times 1.5 feet long times 1.3 feet high. Is your new design smaller than a typical oven? Show your work, round to the nearest hundredth. And so we did 1 times 5 times 1 times 5. And I got 75 for the top and then 150 for the bottom. And I got a total to 2 and 25 hundredths, and that times 1.3 is 2.925, which would be 2.925 feet cubed.
That shows that their refrigerator is smaller than the typical oven.
And continues on with various other enrichment problems utilizing the formula that they learned today. And then what happens at the end of class? The best part, right, guys? What do I do?
We get assigned homework to do.
To practice the skill for further mastery. And that was an example of the homework page. And then Mrs. Hargreaves will talk about some reteach.
Hi, I'm going to talk about how, as a special educator, I've been implementing the Envisions math program with the students from whom I work. I usually start out with the Tier 1 instruction in the classroom. I push in, and I will be there when, say, Mr. Mayu or Ms. Fay start their lesson, especially to see that solve and share. I do a lot of observing during that time. I walk around and I look to see what are the students doing, how are they approaching the problems, and do they understand. I listen for the vocabulary. Do they understand what's being asked of them? Because the terminology and the vocabulary is really important, especially the students that I work with. Sometimes they need a little help in that area. I try to work hard to parallel my instruction to what is happening in the classroom. So from there, I will usually and pull the students for small group instruction, which is our Tier 2. And I go at a much slower pace. And often during this time, I'm backtracking some to get the students the foundational skills that they need to move forward. As you can see up there, there's an intervention page in math diagnostics. And at the beginning of the school year, what I did was I gave the students a diagnostic test, and after that we have a checklist that we can go through. What skills do the students have? What skills are they missing? So I can form my instruction around that, where I have to back up, and that way they can get what they need to be able to work in the program. So I may show the visual learning video a second time and go through it, stopping like Mr. Mayu did, but we might write down the steps and what are we going to do next, and really working with them so that they can get that mastery to close the gap. We want to do like the I do, we do, you do, to have them be able to have that gradual release of responsibility. So really what I do is use some of the intervention lessons in the book. As you can see up there, they're showing a workbook page, which is an intervention page, and it starts with having the students use some manipulatives so that they can build with the blocks and count how many blocks to fill cubic, to see where volume is and how that works. And so once they sort of get to have that more hands-on piece, we're able to work in the regular workbook and move forward and through the problems. After that, we really do work a lot on the vocabulary, just making sure that they understand what is being asked of them. And then if students need the Tier 3 instruction, which is much more intensive, I may work with a student one-on-one that may be working even 2 or more grades below where we are, and we're able to take those same skills and build upon them so that they can get to where they need to be for mastery. And that's really what I do in my resource room.
So at this time, we'd entertain any questions for our 5th grade students and teachers.
Are there any questions on tonight's presentations? Naomi.
This isn't a question, it's a moment of admiration for doing math in public for us. Thank you very much.
And he is. I was looking at him like you're doing homework at a school board meeting. Very good. So I do have one question for the students. Since it's a new program for you this year, and I asked the same thing at our last meeting, it was a very bad question for the kindergartners because they'd never had math before at all. But on that note, do you like math this year more than you liked it last year?
It's definitely different because we're used to the everyday mathematics, but overall it hasn't been really like that confusing or anything. It's more like kind of like smoother to work through, and where like the everyday math was kind of like set up into like almost like we jumped to volume to like fractions or say whatever, but this one has like a much smoother transition than the everyday math.
That's great to hear. What do you think, Timmy?
Yeah, and the good thing was that like all of the like videos that we actually watched on the things always helped everyone in the class, and it was just like a really good program.
Thank you. And you guys, what do you think?
I like it more just because it's more of a together kind of learning, more than with everyday math. It was kind of just like you had these specific problems and you had to go do them, and with everyday math it kind of like is more of real life problems in math.
Gotcha. And Michael?
I like it better because it actually gives you more like things to help you doing it, like the videos and the guided practice.
I love it. It's great information. Yes. So yeah, we'll take it up a level. So teachers, what do you think based on what your students are seeing? How's the transition been for you?
I was on the math committee, and
We have a ringer.
yeah, I'm very happy with the new program. And to build off what Maeve said, everyday math, some of the kids that did get confused by it got confused because there wasn't that continue in one topic until mastery. Here, everything is sequential and builds on each other. Sometimes with everyday math, if you followed the program, you might be bringing up a second topic during a lesson, and if that had been connected to the first, it would have helped, but it wasn't always. Sometimes it was reinforcing something that they learned before, but it didn't. It confused some kids. It didn't speak to what they were actually trying to learn that day. It was great to review, but it didn't work as well. What they're reviewing today is what they need to go on to the next lesson, which is related to what we're doing. So a couple of the kids have talked about fractions. We learned to do fractions in all 4 operations, and it was sequential with nothing in between to give them a chance to forget the pieces that they already had learned and used. So overall, most of the children seem happy with it, and I've been very happy using it. I love the fact that I can display their actual workbook pages. So if I see that there's confusion about something, we can all be looking at the problem that they actually have. I'm not trying to find something from Khan Academy that's going to meet that need. I can display their workbook page, and I can open discussion and help them understand what they already know and what we need to do to go to the next step. So I've been very pleased with it.
I would agree with Mr. Mayu about everyday math, and even though it was the spiraling curriculums, for some students it just wasn't the best method. And I love all the resources that come with this program, all the technology that comes with it, the diagnostic box for the intervention, the resources for enrichment stations. There's also mats that they do a lot of reading and data and then use that to solve problems. A lot of the manipulatives that came with it, we got a class set of that bag right there. So each student could have their own pieces. So it really came with a lot of great tools, and I think it offers a lot of differentiation, as you can see from the examples, and ongoing assessment. So you're constantly able to see where the student is in the level of mastery. So I think some of the unit tests are long. These guys might agree too. Some students really struggle to get through the unit test in a single sitting, but I like the program. Yeah.
Mrs. Hargraves.
as a special educator, I do really like how the program is very sequential and that we stick with one topic until mastery, and that I'm able to go back a grade or two, even to help the students to build upon the skills that they need and have that foundation to move forward. I have found that my students have done very well with the math this year, and hadn't always been a fan of math because it was difficult for them and it was challenging, and that they got to understand some of the concepts and topics and felt confident that they learned what they needed to learn before moving on to something new.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Thank you, 5th grade. Good job.
Good job.
Now we'll switch out our 5th graders with our 6th graders.
Is your mic on?
Sure will. All right, are we good?
Yeah, this time,
All
yeah.
right, because I am a soft speaker. So I'm Lisa Labreche, 6th grade teacher at J Muse, and I have with me Maya Stubbs and Delaney Callahan, and we're going to work together to show you from a perspective of an educator and the perspective of the students through topic 6.2, which is fractions, decimals, and percents, and the conversion of them. So in 6th grade, each topic takes 2 days to teach. So we have a day 1 and we have a day 2. So I'm going to explain to you what day 1 looks like, again, from my perspective and a student perspective, and then Mrs. Garbars is going to take day 2. So we're going to split that up for you. Up front, you'll see what the students see at the very beginning of math, and the components of the journal from the solve and discuss perspective tell them exactly what it is that they're going to learn. The I can statement, which is that college and career readiness, student-friendly language, so they're not guessing at what it is that they're learning. It also has the math practices that they're going to implement throughout, and we've already at the beginning of the year talked about the math practices, so they're familiar with them and what they're expected to use specifically for a lesson. They, through the solve and discuss, they're building background knowledge for what it is that they're about to do in 6.2 for this lesson. They are going to be able to work independently if they're comfortable with the topic, if they have that background knowledge and they're ready to jump in, or they can work collaboratively with someone sitting next to them and just kind of bounce those ideas off of each other. They can use algorithms that they've learned from the past. They can also use those strategies that they're most comfortable with, so that one size doesn't fit all. We can each do something but get the same, we can do something different but get the same answer. And then, like Lewis said, we compare the answers. Hey, I got this answer, you got that answer. I wonder why they're different. Well, I solved it this way, and then you can find if it's a computation error or what it is that they did wrong, but it's a student discussion as opposed to me telling them, well, hey, this is where you went wrong, and how about you look at it? They're looking at what they themselves have done. Through this, we're also looking at the students having a productive struggle. So it might not be something that they understand, but they're working through it. And we in our class talk a lot about perseverance, and just, you're not going to give up just because you didn't understand it, and stick with it, because if you don't get it, you will. And then they're getting that immediate feedback. So yes, I figured the problem out to this point, but I can tell that I don't know the second step of how to solve it, and so carrying on from there. This also fits into the framework of instruction, so building that background knowledge will help them move forward in what we're doing throughout the lesson. So the second slide is actually a journal page, and the little microphone would then, I can play it out loud. There again, going back to, I can write equivalent values as fractions, decimals, and percent. So they're using their knowledge of what they know about how do I make a fraction from a percent, or if I know a percent, how do I make a decimal out of that? So Maya and Delaney together are going to talk about how they went about solving this particular problem.
To start off each lesson, we normally discuss a sample problem that is similar to the ones that we will see throughout the topic. For example, in topic 6.2 is about relating fractions, decimals, and percents, so we did a problem with a grid.
As you can see in Delaney's work, we counted the amount of blue tiles that were in the grid and wrote that as a percent. By doing this, we were then able to make the equivalent fraction and decimal.
There are 3 examples for each topic that all explain different situations.
So that's going to lead me to my next slide. So after the students have come together and discussed how they solved that particular problem, how did you get the blue for the fraction, or the orange, how many were shaded blue, yellow, they're going to use that knowledge through the 3 examples. So each topic has 3 examples to show the students. They are animated, and they're also interactive. So the students, we weren't able to show that, but the left-hand side will show you the progression of what I would press, and then a fraction would come up, or the division would come up, to show them how they solve it. So they're looking at the process and how they solved it, and they're watching how it's solved instead of trying to solve it themselves. They're just watching. And then they're going to do a try it at the bottom. And the 3 examples that they give you, they build off of each other, so they get progressively more difficult, and students are learning something different in the second example that they didn't learn in the first, and so on to the third. But each one will have an independent practice at the end, but they can again work independently or collaboratively depending on their comfort level. And it will also show them more than one way to solve the problem, so the students can choose which one's more comfortable or which one will let them be more successful. So that's kind of a good thing. So Maya and Delaney are going to talk about example number 3.
Teddy's friend Jacob spends 5/8 of his homework time doing math problems. Write 5/8 as a decimal and as a percent.
To the right, we see that there is a bar graph kind of thing. And we see how much time he would spend on each part of his homework.
We would divide the numerator by the denominator to get our decimal, and when we do that, we would get 625 thousandths.
After we get our decimal, we can find our percent by dividing by 100. So we move the decimal 2 places over to the right.
All right. So that would conclude the practice part, and then we would go now into the journal page independent practice, which is the next slide, where you will see the key concept at the top again. So always referring back to what the lesson is talking about. So you can use division and equivalent ratio, so it's also giving them the ways in which you can go about solving that problem. The next part, the students will see a do you know how and a do you understand. So the students are not only expected to be able to do the computation part of it, but they're also expected to write about the process. So they're not just expected to do the math, but they're expected to explain how they did the math. So we know that through Smarter Balance and now SAS, that they're expected more to write about the process than just giving an answer. So that's what they're expected to do for this part, and I'm going to have them explain each of those components and how we do that in class.
Before we start our independent practice, Mrs. LaBrush goes over the essential question with the class.
After we had finished with that, we all do independent work on the do you know how side. Mrs. LaBrush comes around while we were working and corrects our answers for immediate feedback.
So those were where my little C's are. As I go around, I'll, yep, you got it, yep, you got it. So they have that immediate feedback of, yes, I understand, no, I don't. And then I think you have something to add on.
Yeah, if it seems like we are struggling with the concept, she will work us through the problem step by step to make sure we fully understand.
So to end day one, this program has what they call a lesson quiz, but we really like to call it an exit slip because it's really not, I think when you put that label of quiz, it's a grade and is this going to affect me? And all we're trying to do is inform instruction. So based upon what we did in class, do they understand what it is that they were taught? So normally there's 5 questions. So this would inform my instruction for day 2. And so usually this is the way that Mrs. Garbars and I talked about it, and we each scored exactly the same. So if they get all correct, then they would go on to enrichment, and Mrs. Garbars will talk about that a little bit more, but that's more of that independent practice where we might actually go into a little bit more with that topic because they understand the 6th grade material, so we might up the ante a little bit. 3 to 4 points, they're on level, so we would put them in, and they might do task cards, play games, and then that intervention would be that small group where we would take them back, I often go through the exit slip with them just to see what was it that you didn't quite understand, and then maybe go over some of the vocab and the reteach to build understanding. So that's day 1. So Mrs. Garbars is going to do the second day.
Hi, everyone. So we are doing day 2. Day 2 is our favorite day because it's when the students get to really get the math that they need based on the lesson quiz or the exit slip from the previous day. So what I do is I sort them all into 3 groups, the on level, the intervention, or the enrichment. And when they come in the morning, it's all up on the screen. And I give codes to the groups that the students are not aware of. So the intervention group might be a number 2, the enrichment group might be a number 3 or 2 or 1, and so on. And it changes every week. So one week, number 1 might be enrichment group. Next week, number 3 might be enrichment group. So the students are not really aware of where they are. They just know that they're getting what they need. I love the math resource that we have as teachers because it gives us every resource that the kids can use based on what level that they get, based on how many questions they get right. They point us right to the direction that that student needs, depending on that exit slip that really guides our instruction for that day. So the students will see up on the board if they are in group 2, they do first, next, and then last. So that when they're done the first one, they go to the next game, or it could be one of the virtual nerd videos that we show you in a minute is really a great center for students, and I love that we're getting kind of back to the centers in math because I think it's extremely beneficial to them to be working together, using the resources that they have that I've given them. They really can collaborate with the students that are all on their same level and talk it out together. So one of the virtual nerds, and we'll kind of show you just a little bit of what I might put this in a center for students who really need a little bit extra help understanding, and this is a great example. And so we won't show you the whole thing, but it basically goes through step by step on how to convert, in this case, percent to decimals. So for those students who may need the reteach that really only got maybe 0 to 1 correct on that exit slip, I might put them at that center first for them to watch and observe, and then they kind of can put it into action. So based on where their level is, they might get math literacy, so they're going to be reading about math and answering questions. They could get math vocab. because we know that if they don't understand the math vocab, it's harder for them to kind of use the concepts in their everyday math work. They could get an enrichment, which is more of a higher order thinking question. It's pretty rigorous, and the students really take a really, they are very excited when they get to that group, and they know that they are in that group when they kind of look at the paper and they say, oh, I know. They feel proud of themselves when they get to that group, and they know that they've really mastered that 6th grade material, so they're ready for more, and they're proud of themselves. So then we have Chase and Holly here who are going to talk you through what each group might look like. So we have Chase first. Yep.
So here we have the Reteach to build understanding, which would be for the students who may need some more help understanding the concept. So the nice thing about this is it kind of gives a brief reteach of the lesson. So here we have at the top, you can see we have some definitions in case you're having a little bit of a struggle with the vocab. And then they start going into these problems that walk you through the steps instead of just giving you a problem to solve. They show you how you can do it, and they help you through that so that you still get that understanding, but you're not totally by yourself. So here they have little boxes that you can fill in. So part of it is done for you. So like I said, you have a little bit of that guidance, and they give you the word problem on the top, and they show you how you can set it up by yourself by using the word problem. And so they go through all the steps you would need to solve the problem, like converting it to a fraction, which would be out of 100 because a percent is a number out of 100. And then they show you how you can reduce that fraction so that it can be understood easily as a smaller decimal or as a percent. And that way you can work it the opposite way. If you're given 1/4 and you need to convert it to a percent, then you'll know how to get that to 25 over 100 or 25 100ths. And then as you go down, they have a couple more examples like that. And on the very bottom, once you've finally gotten that understanding, they give you a problem to do on your own now that you know the steps to go through to do it. And we also have on the side a little example that relates to the problem, so that for those visual learners, you get another way to comprehend it. So this is really nice because if you went over the lesson with your class but you're still having some trouble comprehending it, it kind of walks you through that again so that you're able to do it on your own.
It's nice because when we do the reteach to rebuild, I'll have the students kind of sit and do a productive struggle. And then when I meet with them, I kind of gradually release that responsibility onto them for that bottom question to do completely independent, and then we can all check it together. And most of the time, those who are really, really struggling after those first couple practice problems where we do it step by step, they really have a much better understanding. It's just they need it in that smaller environment. And then Chase is also now going to talk about that math vocab support, that even though sometimes my enrichment group may not need it, I sometimes give it to them just for them to work with the math words. I think it's important for them to use the math vocabulary whenever they can. So even though those enrichment groups based on our math book that said they don't need it, I sometimes like to just kind of throw it out to there as a center just for them to practice using that vocabulary.
So this is the additional vocabulary support, and the great thing about doing the exit slips are that you have a variety of problems that aren't too complicated, and once you hand that exit slip in, the teachers are able to find what you're having difficulties with. So say you're good with comprehending everything and you're able to do it step by step, but you're having a little difficulty processing the vocabulary. Maybe it's confusing you and that's preventing you from excelling with the problems. So this would be for those students who may be a little confused on the words and they just needed that extra boost to help them understand and make sure that they know what the word means and what it looks like in a problem. So here we have, it's a little chart, and on the left side under Word, it has the different words that you'll see appearing a lot in the lesson that you'll need to know in order to do those word problems, and every other problem in general because they're used a lot throughout the lesson. And they have you do a definition to make sure that you understand what it means, because if you have a word and you need to know what that means to understand the problem, but it's a little bit foggy, vague, you don't really have a good understanding, then that's going to be hard because you don't know what they're asking you to do. So that's the definition, and then finally you have a picture or an example, and that's to make sure you know how it looks in a word problem and how to write it. So if they're showing it written in as 1% or 1 over 100, you know that that's the use of a percent and not equivalent or denominator. And that way, when you're using those examples that are given to you, you're able to fully comprehend that.
Excellent. Now we have Holly, who's going to talk about building mathematical literacy.
Alright, so here's the problem given, and I'm going to read it and explain how I got an answer. So, mark each statement as true or false. If the statement is false, circle the word or a phrase that makes it false. Describe how to change the sentence to make it true. Miss Rose bought a package of star stickers. Out of every 10 stars, 4 are gold. If there are 60 stars in the pack, what fraction of the stars in the pack are gold? What percent of the stars in the pack are gold? So, for the first problem, I got false. This is because I have to remove the word gold from the sentence, because this whole pack is not individually just gold stars. It's more like a deal, because out of every 10 stars, 4 of them are gold. So we know that the whole entire pack of stars is not gold. So it is incorrect to say that Miss Rose bought a package of just gold star stickers.
And now Holly will talk about an example of what an enrichment activity would look like.
So this is the enrichment paper. The problem says, Thomas works 12 days out of every month. Does Thomas work the same percent of days each month? Explain. So, I do not think that Thomas does. We believe this because some of the months have different amount of days. For an example, on the months with 31 days, he works about 39% of the 31 days. But on the months with 40 days, he works 40% of those days. And on February, there are only 28 days, so he works 43% of those given days. As you can see, there are different percentages of the days, including 39%, 40%, and 43%. We can see that those are all different, so we can come to the conclusion that the given statement is incorrect.
So you can see with the enrichment activity, there really is a higher level of thinking there. A lot of times the enrichment group is highly collaborative, so they will sit and they will chat and they will argue, and then they finally will come to a conclusion once they have to prove to the others that they're right, or prove to them that their answer is not right. So that's the part that I love, is hearing those mathematical conversations. Other great things that we have as teachers to use is the math tools. So up on the top right, you see that we can use algebra tiles, we can use, there's a calculator there, we can create or look at or analyze diagrams. So there's all different types of tools that we can have the students use, or that we can use to show them different math skills. So those are things that we use throughout the lesson if we feel like there might be a little bit more of a visual part that is needed. Our math lab is great for this. Our computer lab is great because what we can do is we can also go down, because it's highly interactive on the computer, and we can have them play leveled games. We can have them take all the assessments online. Another great tool that we love to use more is when they go on to do those assessments online, it will actually grade it for you, and it'll show you if they got it correct or incorrect, kind of what standard they are really good in, which one do they need help in. So that's something that we can use to help guide our instruction when looking at those standards. And then I can see Mrs. LaBrush is going to talk about that additional practice.
So that would be the end of day 2. So after students have done the enrichment or the vocab building or the reteach, this component is really from the differentiated standpoint. So when you see a 1, 2, or 3, that's where the differentiation comes in. So those students who are on or who truly understand the concept and can do them independently would have a number 3. So those students would then highlight the number 6, 9, 18, 21, 25, 23, and that would be what their homework would be for the night. Students who would be on a level 2 would really be those students who can do some of the problems independently but need a little bit more help. More of the computation they'll be found in number 2, whereas the number 3s would have a lot of the word problems. So a level 2 would highlight the numbers 2, 7, 11, and then the 1s would be those students who were really in the reteach, so they would have the 1, 3, 5, 8. So we really just want them to get the concept first instead of having them do word problems where they really don't understand the concept yet, and be able to do them and feel successful. And then we would, the following day, they would compare their answers. And again, that discussion of, oh, hey, we always star the ones that are different. And, well, this is the answer that I got. Why is my answer different from yours? Well, this is the way that I solved that problem. How are they different?
Okay.
So throughout the entire journal, really, there's tons of other things that the students were able to do or that we were able to do with them. One of them is the STEM activity, which STEM is a pretty hot topic right now. All the kids know what STEM is, so when they see it in their math book, they're pumped. And they're ready to really take on that and use the skills that we've learned throughout that topic and use it in real life situations. So we use this sometimes with our curriculum integrated activities or our tiered integrated activities. It really kind of sets in motion their higher order thinking and their learning through inquiry using the STEM projects, or the 3-act math, which again is another piece of the puzzle. There's so many components to this and so many real world applications that the students are able to use that I think as teachers we appreciate because the students feel like it matters. And I think with everyday math we didn't always get that. So when we have things like the STEM and the performance tasks that the kids really get and understand and they can be connected to, you just get a better outcome.
At this time, we would like to thank you for the opportunity to come and share with you about what math instruction looks like this year at the Upper Elementary School. We hope we've provided you with a clear picture of classroom instruction and that you're able to put 2 and 2 together, right? At this time, we would welcome any questions for our 6th grade students and teachers, and thank you.
Naomi?
So listening to both this presentation and the previous grade, I was noticing that there's a really wonderful level of shared language happening. There's the releasing responsibility, there's the productive struggle, and other terms. I was curious, are these something that's evolved recently, or is it something that you create as groups of teachers? Where does that come from?
I think along the way we've developed this language, and I was on the math committee as well, so there is a lot of that collaborative talk with the middle school and with the elementary, and I think we've heard some of them through the Envisions program and the presenters that came in, and I think we've developed, and we like that. I like that productive struggle, because that has to be productive, right? And I think the students get more out of it when we talk about that perseverance part, and I think that's something that's coming up too, is that perseverance and sticking with it. But you're right, there's a lot of different language-based terms.
Excellent. Are there any other questions from the board? I'm going to give you the same one I've given every class, and I will go after. I'll let Mark go first.
I'm sorry. I just I appreciated that question, and so I just wanted to. Mrs. LaBrush is absolutely right that the work of the district curriculum committee, teachers working together across grade levels, worked through some of these issues too. They talked about their aspirations for what they wanted their students to be able to achieve, and off of that came agreements about common language and so on and so forth. I would also just point out that the term productive struggle or desirable difficulties is something that we've been talking about in Merrimack for actually a few years, particularly dating back to our August Academy a few years ago when we introduced the idea of trying to convert our classrooms even more than they already were into inquiry-based classrooms. And one of the ways that you do that is by not being too quick with the answer or with getting students over a hurdle. Sometimes dealing with a hurdle or a struggle, as long as it's productive, actually is as good a teaching tool as any you can find. And so I would just point out that Merrimack has actually been trying to be about that productive struggle or desirable difficulty for a few years. And to the great credit of the teachers on the math committee, they adopted that concept and really went forth with it in the development of their curriculum. But I'm glad that you pointed that out as something that you recognize, because it's really something that's been kind of at the center point of what Merrimack's been trying to be about, not just in math, but in really all the content areas.
Excellent. We have a ringer over here too, because she teaches teachers for a living. So, and I did have that same question for you. I asked the other kids, how are you liking math this year compared to last year? So I'll ask the kids and the teachers next.
I enjoyed the math program better than I did last year, or more than I did last year, because it's more adaptive to your skills. If you're struggling on understanding the vocabulary, Miss Garbars will help you and tell you about how to do it. And you also have adaptive worksheets. And there is more of, I feel, with like the slideshows that we do during class and the problems being read aloud and the videos, that there's more of understanding being built.
Excellent.
Yeah, I really enjoy this math program because, like Mr. Mayu was saying, like the sequential order that it goes in is so much easier to understand, because in everyday math it would be kind of scattered and very vague, and how it would work is they would only have like 2 steps. You would learn one lesson in one day, and then you would move on to something totally different that you had never had any skills built up for. And at this program, every single lesson follows the next one, so you build up the skills to work with the next lesson. Like before we did percents, I believe we were working on decimals and fractions, which really goes with percents because you need that knowledge of understanding decimals and fractions to understand how to work with percents. And so that's one thing that I really like about it. And also I love all the different steps. Like they thoroughly explain each lesson and each concept to you. In everyday math, they would give you these indirect questions just to solve, and they might not even explain the lesson before. They would just fire these questions at you, these problems for you to do. But in this program, the Envisions program, they explain each one thoroughly. They give examples, and they make sure before you do the problems that you know how to do it and you know how to explain it, and you understand all of these different things that they're teaching you before you go and do it mathematically on the paper. They want to make sure that you have the vocabulary support and the understanding, and you understand why it works and how it works, not just this is math and you do it because you do. It's math. There's an understanding and a reason to everything. So I really like that part of it.
Excellent. What do you guys think
I like how it really, all the examples that it gives with the videos and how it stops. There's certain stopping points for the video and where Mrs. LaBreche can ask the question to the class and we can discuss it in groups and then share with the class what we think. And I like how the try-its are about the last example that you did. So you really know what, like the formula, how you can set it up and what to do with all the fractions and decimals.
I like this program because of the examples, like Maya said, and how it's adaptive. However, the tests seem to be like very short, so if you get, and your grade weighs heavily upon that, so if you get a B on that test and you had an A in math, your whole grade will also go down with that test. So, but other than that, I like it.
Well, Mrs. Fay wants them to be shorter, and you want it to be longer, so we have to find somewhere in the middle for you two.
What I've noticed in this program, because I started with Everyday Math 16 years ago, so teaching that for 16 years and then having a new program, there's so much to this, and it is really technology rich. So I think that really applies to today's kids, and they know how to do way more than I know how to do. So what I also like about it is that I think it really applies to real world. And a lot of the kids are, well, why do we have to do this? I'm never going to have to use this in my life. And where would this apply? And all of the examples really do show it through a real world application. And so I think they're a little bit more invested in it because they can't say that they wouldn't use it in a real world. You know, you're going to paint at some time. You're going to have to, measure, or you're going to fill your car with gas and you need to know how much money, or you're going to shop. So I think that really applies to them. And I do like that it is college and career ready. The sequence of it really helps the students with the continuity and going from one topic to the other. I feel like they do have a more solid foundation moving from one topic to the other.
What I do love about this program is that every student has an opportunity to succeed. So they're getting the math that they need, and that they know that math. So when they get the paper in front of them, they know it, because I know that they do based on the exit slip that they're given. So they're not given something that they have no idea what they're doing. We're working way up to the more challenging ones by first giving them what they need and building on that skill before we give them the next one. Math, I know at this age at least, can cause a lot of kids some pretty severe anxiety going into it. So this program is nice because it levelizes everything for you, and it's very teacher friendly. So if I know a kid is really struggling, I know exactly where I need to go, and I know how to get him to that next step. So the fact that every student gets what they need and feels successful is kind of what all math teachers look for.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you guys so much. You did a wonderful job. It's just about bedtime. So hopefully we didn't keep you out too late the last week of school.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
You guys rocked.
Nice job, Sid. You didn't have to be nervous. You were awesome.
You rocked it. I'm so pumped. Nice job. I think I said pumped.
Marcia, we'll allow you to stay if you want to talk about the career exploration. If you're available, we'd love that.
Great job, Chase. Thanks, you too.
Thank you so much, guys, for letting her come. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Nice job, Holly. You rocked it.
Okay. Yep. And while we're filing out, and we have Marcia here, we're going to talk about the Career Ready surveying that you've been doing. So if you can give us an update, that'd be great.
We hosted our first career day on the 12th. That would have been last Thursday. We had like 30 to 35 different people throughout the state. We had state troopers, male and female. We had nurses, male and female. We had a veterinarian. We had engineers, software engineers, just a wide variety of people. And students have the opportunity to decide what 5 top careers they'd be interested in. They would have conducted their survey in the classroom. From that, they would have made those choices, and then we gave them a choice. We scheduled them, and we had a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. I know it was definitely a new track that you were taking, and we look forward to hearing future years' results. So
good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
allowing us to
taking
do
the
that.
extra time. And we will go on to middle school, and welcome. You brought 2 Ms. Smiths for mass to keep us on our toes tonight. My kids have one of each, so
there you go.
It's very confusing for a while.
So thank you very much for having us this evening. My name's Adam Carragher. I'm the principal at the middle school. And as we go through, I'm going to have each staff member introduce themselves as well as the students. But first, I'm going to pass the mic over to Mrs. DeMoore real quick. All right.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shauna DeMoore, the assistant principal, and thank you for having us tonight to discuss the new math program and curriculum. But before we go on to that, I was just sharing with our district leadership team about our Washington, D.C. trip. We are just fresh off of that trip, and I just wanted to give a quick little overview because we had this incredible, unique experience, and I just thought it would be really cool for everybody here to hear that, and the 6th and 7th grader, well, the 6th graders left, but the 7th graders, you have a lot to look forward to next year. We went on the DC trip, and there were 310 of us, to about 280 students, and on Tuesday, June 6th, we toured Arlington National Cemetery. All 280 students were adequately prepared by their social studies teachers to understand the symbolism of the changing of the guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier. While our students watched the changing of the guard, you could hear a pin drop. It was incredible, just the respect that our students and staff showed. After the ceremony, we were gathered waiting for our tram ride when the police and Secret Service were entering the Memorial Amphitheater, right where we were standing, for the 50th anniversary memorial service for Robert Kennedy's assassination. Our social studies facilitator, Barbara Danute's nephew, is a police officer at Arlington, and he was able to get us into the ceremony. So as our students were standing there, cars were pulling up, and dignitaries started arriving. We saw Ethel Kennedy get out of the car, escorted by her children, and it was just this, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it, because some of our students didn't know who these dignitaries were, but some did, and we were just standing there in awe, watching this procession going into the amphitheater. And we were sitting there, and we were able to see Ethel come in, his 2 children, Kathleen and Congressman Joe Kennedy. We heard them speak, in addition to former President Bill Clinton, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, Congressman John Lewis, and Student March for Our Lives advocate Emma Gonzalez. An Irish tenor and Kenny Chesney also performed. And it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our students, and I just want you to all know they represented Merrimack so well. They sat for an hour and 15 minutes in the sun on these marble benches, and unbelievable. Later in the trip, we went on a tour of the U.S. Capitol, and one of our tour guides has family in Merrimack. And upon our return, Adam Carragher got an email from the family saying that her cousin, who's a visitor guide at the Capitol, heard that Merrimack was visiting, so she snatched up one of our groups. And it was unsolicited praise, and she said that our students had great questions, thoughtful answers, and ideas, and it just reaffirms what we already know about our students, but it's great to get that feedback that's unsolicited and just be able to share tonight. So thank you, and I just wanted to say, with that said, we're going to get the ball rolling a little bit with our math curriculum and program at Merrimack Middle School, and allow me to introduce Cheryl Smith, our math coordinator. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us this evening. I just want to take a couple of minutes to give you an overview of the math department this year. This year we spent numerous hours collaborating on the new program Envisions. We revamped our scope and sequence to meet the needs of the students, and 2 of the 8th grade teachers piloted various algebra programs with the hope of establishing a new curriculum for next year. Our goals for next year will be to continue collaborating on the Envision program, to continue to adjust the scope and sequence, and hopefully have a new algebra program to become familiar with as well. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jill Smith, one of the math teachers.
And we'll see if we can maybe unplug this one because we're on a roll. No, totally good. I think you're fine. We got it.
Can you hear me now? We're good?
Yes. So the guy behind the curtain was like, we can't hear a thing.
So I was also on the district math committee, and this year I taught 7th grade standard math and pre-algebra. So in both classes, I would use the Envision workbooks to help introduce the topic. I would sometimes use the initial problem and go through the examples, and we would do the try-it problems together. We would then do the first page questions together. Some of the questions ask the why and the how that we do these problems, and then there's a couple examples that we do together. I then have students start the next 2 pages of practice problems in class. The problems start out taking them through step by step and then get a little more challenging as they go along. And they finish up with the assessment practice problems. The next day we'll go over each of these problems and sometimes do the lesson quiz for some extra practice. I then give the students all or part of the additional practice worksheet, as well as some additional problems that I find somewhere else. I've always supplemented any book that we use with materials I feel will help students understand the material. For assessments, I would use most questions from Envision, but as well as some of my own questions. To review for quizzes or tests, I would often assign the Excel practice. These are the online practice questions. They're little quizzes on each topic. So students get the question correct. It tells them, great job. And if not, then they can answer a similar question, the same skill, similar question. There's also little hints they can click on. There's tools they can use, but there's little hints that will help them step by step through the problem if they're having trouble with it. Personally, I think the Envision program is challenging, but I do like how it relates the topics to real life. Sometimes it's more difficult because most of the problems are word problems, but that's more real than a worksheet of number problems. I think it's good to have a mix of both the real world problems and then practice problems, so that's what we do. I'm going to let Jack and Caitlin tell you a little bit more.
Here we go. Try this now. Hi, I'm Caitlin. I really like the new Envision Pro. I like how the format is of the books. It has notes up at the top to explain how we do the problems, and then it has some vocabulary to help us with the reading part of the problems. The reading part can be challenging for some kids because if they struggle in reading, then that might bring their math grade down a little bit, and it might be more challenging than just the number problems. But I think that the having the vocabulary up at the top really helps. And
I'm Jack Pecora. I'm in the 7-2 pre-algebra class. I like the Envision 2.0 program. It gives a lot of examples while we're learning the new subjects. It will provide examples that the teacher can go through with us on the board. It will give us the vocab we need to know before we start the new topic. It provides real-world examples and world problems that can help us relate to the outside world. It also is a lot less repetitive than the everyday math that we used to do. It doesn't go back to the old subjects we've already learned, but does still relate to what we've already learned. Yeah.
So I'll pass it over to Miss Brody over here.
Hi, I'm Lori Brody. Lori Brody, 7th grade math teacher. I have two of my pre-algebra students with me, Ainsley and Megan. You've heard an exhaustive explanation of the Envisions 2.0 program this evening. At the middle school, it's a little bit different than at the upper elementary school. We have some things, we have everything that, no, let me say this. They have everything, we have a little bit less. We don't have the, as much of the beginning building blocks as they do, so we are supplementing some of that. And I have here, if you could pass this, Ms. Schoenfeld. I have some examples of some of the building blocks that I use to help the kids prepare for the lessons that they will be learning, to make sure that they have the foundational information that they need to be successful in each topic. We do start, or for this particular topic that I went over in my notes, percents. We previously had done proportions, so they have proportions in their mind. And working with percents, there was an introductory problem that was solve and discuss it, like you had seen earlier with the upper elementary students. They worked through the solve and discuss it without my assistance to begin with, and then they begin to discuss a little themselves, and then we talk about it as a whole class. And that gets their brains working and able to think about the concepts that we'll be covering in this topic. And talking about percents, they look at a real-world problem. You went out to lunch with your friends. How are you going to split the bill evenly, including a tip? So they have to come up with how they add a tip to the cost of their lunch, and then how do they divide that all up? There are a couple of different ways that you can do this. So different students might come up with something, you know, Ainsley might come up with one way and Megan will come up with another, but they still get the same answer in the end. And that is that productive struggle that we were talking about earlier. After that, I like to go into some notes and some of this basic information that they need to have behind them before we go deeply into the concepts. So there are, there might be notes on vocabulary. They need that base of vocabulary to move on. The Envisions program is very heavily language-based, and I've seen a little bit of trouble getting the language down, so I like to go over a lot of that before we start the topic or the lesson. And then from there, there are other basics that they need to know. We need to make sure that they know how to convert from a fraction to a decimal to a percent. So there are some visual guides that they have in their interactive notebooks. I have the class do an interactive notebook so that they have one solid resource where they can quickly look up how to do something. And then they can use their book for examples, and then they can go from there and work through some problems on their own. In the future, well, not in the future, a couple days into it, they'll do a warm-up. And that warm-up is a formative assessment for me to see how they're doing, how they're coming along, and that will guide my instruction through the entire unit so that at the end, when we do the summative, I know if we need to go back and do any reteaching or if certain students need a little bit of a small group workshop one day. And then from there, this is fractions, decimals, and percents. We can move on and connect how do we apply proportions that we learned in the last unit to percents. So we're using something we already know and applying it in a new way. So it's building up the knowledge of that concept and making it a little more solid in their brains. I like the program. I like the progression. I like the fact that one thing builds upon another. I was not a part of the everyday math. However, my children did do that, and I saw this kind of, it just didn't seem like they had enough time to practice one thing. So here, they have enough time to practice one thing. They become much more confident in it, and they feel more successful. I do like that about this. There are a lot of resources online through the program that they can use, and those are very useful. Every child learns in a different way, so to have different options available to all the kids makes a huge difference. So far, so good. It's been a tremendous amount of work to bring the kids from where they are to where the new curriculum is. And we've all worked together at the middle school. We've collaborated a lot, and we're on a path for success. You know, so every year it'll get a little bit easier And every year the kids will come out a little bit stronger. So it'll be a good progression. And Ainsley and Megan are going to tell you something that they feel different, how they feel about math this year.
So this year I definitely feel like I learned quite a bit more and progressed more than I did last year with the Everyday Math program. I feel like the program we have now is such a steady and keeps us moving in the same direction that with the Everyday Math it could jump from fractions to a pie graph in 2 days, whereas in the Envisions program it'll move from a fraction to a decimal to a percent to a degree, where I feel like that's keeping us a lot on the same path as we can keep going and progressing even faster than we did. And like the previous students have said, and like everyone has said as they showed up today, it shows a lot of the real world problems. Like, I'm not dealing with Jane buying 34 apples at the grocery store. I'm going out with Megan to buy lunch and we need to split it, like Miss Brody said. And I feel like I've learned a lot from my other students in my math class this year as well. Like, I sit directly behind Megan in my class, and I feel that with this program, excuse me, I'm able to interact with my other students more, and I feel like Megan has also taught me a lot because she has a lot better grade in math than I do. But it's definitely, this program's definitely helped me excel in math and in learning the curriculum.
Hi, I'm Megan. I really like the program this year. I feel like the book and online, there's like a lot of resources. So at home when I'm doing my homework or having trouble figuring out a new topic, I like that you're able to easily access videos and notes, and even your book has example problems and step-by-step how to do it. And I feel like that's really helpful, and it is in chronological order, like it doesn't jump from subject to subject. Yes.
Excellent. So I am going to read a prepared statement by one of our 8th grade teachers who unfortunately could not be here with us, but she wanted to make sure her thoughts and ideas were conveyed. It's Jen Levine, who is an 8th grade teacher. So the current pre-algebra program is the new Envisions program. So this year's implementation of the revised math curriculum in the new program presented its share of challenges. It was through these challenges that we met with success, or we found areas to refine for the future. Some of these have already been covered by math coordinator Cheryl Smith, scope and sequence, and some of the other items. This year I've implemented interactive notebooks as well as utilizing the online resources that are part of the program. A typical day in the life of students in my math class includes exploring mathematical concepts independently, in small groups, and as a whole class. We utilize the new math book to familiarize ourselves with new topics and look at the examples. The program is heavy with wording and explanations. We spent time dissecting the language and refining our responses by choosing our words carefully to those problems that require written explanations. I also supplemented lessons with materials from other programs based on the individual learning needs of students. I am able to assess student understanding through practice problems, entries into our interactive notebooks, and formative and summative assessments. Students shared with me a 70-30 split, with 70% of students finding the new program easy to understand. So we may have had a little bit of a tip, Chairperson Barnes, that you may be asking about whether or not they like it or not. So it does give a little bit of insight, although obviously you may wish for more. So at this time, I'd like to open it up for any questions.
And something tells me you watch our old meetings, because I asked the last group in the elementary levels the same questions, just saying. So you had a tip. But on that note, questions from the board? Andy?
So one of the things I've heard a couple of times now in the middle school one is that the program needs to be augmented with outside material versus when you're at the earlier grades, upper elementary, that the program is pretty self-sufficient in terms of what it provides. So I don't know if it goes to Cheryl or you guys or the teachers or to Mark is, do we find that I'm going to say this wrong, does the Envision program run out of steam as you get to the higher grades where it needs to be augmented, or is it just a choice to be able to add into that stuff? So that's sort of the question, because it sounds really solid at the lower grades, and this is the first we've seen that there's need to be augmenting, because we heard that a lot with the everyday math. There was augmentation that we had to do, so I'm just sort of curious.
Cheryl, do you want to?
It's true. It really doesn't offer as much practice for the students as we're used to. And keep in mind that our present 8th grade this is their 3rd program they've had. They had everyday math. Then they had Glencoe last year, 7th graders, no matter what level they were in. And now this year they have Envision. So for them, it's been a real challenge. And that's why we've really kind of gone back and looked at some additional supplementary material we had on hand. I didn't really purchase anything. It was everything we had that I've purchased in the past 3 years. We've utilized that to meet the students' needs. I think over time it will come along. It's just that those particular level of students have been through so much. We're just trying to help fill the process. And I just want to add one question. You talked about productive strugglers. The teachers have been that way at the middle school. But we've worked together, and we really do work together, and they share materials among themselves. There's emails going back and forth when people give quizzes or tests or exit slips. We're always talking about it. Maybe not in person, but we'll do it by email if to try to get across to everybody. So I mean, we've made progress. We have a lot of work to do still, but we're willing to keep working together.
Mark.
So I just want.
I'll give right back to you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to add to your question, you say that the program might be running out of steam, so we need other materials. I find that also the outside materials have helped me. So my teacher will give me foldable and everything. That it's not just the program that's running out of steam. It's also that I feel that sometimes in the book the wording is confusing. So when you give us outside materials, it's easier for us to understand the vocabulary and to see more of a process that sometimes the book does not give us.
I think it's a differentiation more than anything else. The augmentation tends to lend itself to differentiation. Not every student is going to learn in the same way, and sometimes the gaps are bigger and bigger at the upper grades. So you have to fill in for these kids. There is a need there, and we have to provide that for them. Not every single student will be able to learn in the same way. So it's just kind of trying to balance the scales for all of the kids across the middle school.
I have to say, you mentioned foldables. I had no idea what they were.
Did
My
you see
wife
one?
is.
Did you see one in the folder I sent you?
Yes, and it's funny because my wife is a math teacher at a high school out in Wilton. She makes foldables for her high school kids. So it's a concept that stays around, and it's really cool. I had no idea what it was until I saw her make them.
So I would just add to what's been said, very, very excellent and apt statements, that we said all along, for years we've been saying, that any program that we adopt is inevitably going to need to be supplemented. It's not a failure of any program. We could have chosen this program or 3 others that were evaluated, and any one of them that would have been chosen would have required, because of exactly what Mrs. Brody said, which is that we differentiate. And the differentiation requires good teachers to seek whatever material is out there that's going to be supportive. And there is no program that would provide every possible resource that would match the learning needs of every student. And one of the things that I think our teachers are really excelling at in Merrimack is trying to get to understand the needs of each student. And once that happens, it poses the challenge of, so what do you need? And there isn't a single program out there that's going to provide all of that. So I really credit the teachers for trying to get to know their students and their needs and to work through what that's going to take. But I would just caution that's not a reflection on this program any more than it would be a reflection on any other program that the committee ultimately would have selected. It wouldn't have been a reflection on any program.
Right, and just to close on this, it seems that the Envisions program, from what I've heard from the earlier grades, it has enough challenge and enough differentiation in what it provides, that it works pretty well. But when you get to higher grades, higher knowledge, more differentiated learner, there's more that needs there. So running out of steam wasn't really intended to be that way as much as it was to show that when you get here and then when you get to the high school, that differentiation of different sources will become more important as you go through. So
I have Cinda and Naomi.
And just to add to that, it would be my understanding too, that would be common sense, I think, to say that when we're cutting over to a program like this, there's no magic that happens that gives this seamless transition. And the way we've been hearing about the Envision program is there's a lot of block building. And so it doesn't surprise me that there would be some supplemental materials that would be used to try to help bridge that gap. What I would be curious about is next year, is the same amount of materials needed, or as you're getting kind of a cohort of students in their second year with this program versus, and then as time goes on, would that graph tend to decrease based on the building blocks that have been developed?
Naomi.
Mine was almost identical, but I turned it a little bit into a question. Vocabulary came up a whole lot, and the language that's used in the texts. And I'm curious, clearly it's just a prediction on your part, a best guess, but if you had to think about how much of that language is something that younger students will begin to acquire earlier and bring with them, as opposed to things that they're learning now, how would you evaluate that as opposed to simply a need that will continue to exist?
That's an excellent question, because I just had this conversation with a few math teachers that are not here. And when I was asking them their thoughts and input, they said, we really feel that the struggles with the language piece are going to decrease as the years go on, because those kids are going to be exposed. And especially, I would say, the 8th grade teachers who, as Cheryl had mentioned, have gone through a couple different programs in their time. Next year, I think the 8th grade is going to notice, and they even said, we know next year, we're already talking to the 7th grade teachers. We know they're exposed to this language. We know it's going to get easier. And it has been quite a challenge, and I would say they took it and they've been running with it. But yes, that has come up in conversation, and that's the feeling of the teachers. I don't know if Lori or Jill or Cheryl want to speak to that as well.
No, it's true.
Pretty much.
Yeah. It's true what Shauna said. I do believe that in the years to come, it will get easier for the students. And as I said, the most challenging has been the 8th grade, only because of the programs they've been through in the past few years.
Yes, Cinda.
I mean, the good news, too, I think, is that there is that assessment that's happening regularly. So that gives you the kind of the guidelines of when you need to introduce, when you need to reach for something else, because you're doing that regularly. So I think that's the real positive thing in this, is that assessments are happening multiple times a week.
So if I can give my 2 cents here, I have to say it's nice to have such a strong presence in the middle school with the math facilitator that we do. So we're in very good hands with Cheryl Smith. So I know my husband and I always loved parent teacher with you when my son had you, and it was like the highlight of my night, where the least stressful of the subject areas. But honestly, my son in your class loved math more than he ever has and has since. So you really do spark something in making math come to life. So you're in good hands in your department, with all your transitions with Cheryl at the helm there. So thank you for all your work there.
Thank you.
So, are there any other questions from the board? So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job, guys. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, yep. We're going to be moving on to item number 4, which is the focus on district-wide STEM, Science, Technology, Math, and Science Plan, with Nancy Rose. So welcome, Nancy.
Hello.
You bet.
We're getting set up.
The room always clears out as the night goes on for these things. Public comment's going to be really boring later. So.
See if it's
And we're trying to light up the Microsoft Surface, it looks like.
starting to come up.
Up, I see light.
Is it changing? Here we go. Okay. So I am not a PowerPoint aficionado. I do dabble in it, but I put something together because there are some kind of fun things to look at. So I'm here to talk about what has sort of bloomed into a STEM kind of a program, but it's not actually quite that formal as much as it's things coming together at a coordinated time maybe. And you'll notice that there's an A in there, and that actually was part of the discussion that we had over the course of the last year, which is that science, technology, engineering, and math really they benefit greatly when you incorporate art, and art benefits when you incorporate those other disciplines into it. So I have started referring to it as STEAM, but I kind of go back and forth because with different initiatives it was called STEM, and I try to honor, if I can remember, how we referred to it when we were going into a phase. So what this kind of started with last year was recognizing that we had first Lego League Junior. We had a going concern program at Thornton's Ferry that had been going for years, coordinated by a parent whose children are long past Thornton's Ferry, which I think happens a lot. His name is Chad Coolidge. And we did not have a comparable program at MES or Reed's, and so we had 2 schools worth of kids missing out on this program. So I started trying to get started getting the program going at those schools, which also generated a discussion at the upper where we realized that the two-year schools, because the population rotates through so quickly, it's hard to maintain a consistent program. We used to have a teacher who coordinated, and he retired several years ago, Dennis Pym, who many people remember. And we just had a hard time getting somebody that either could take it on because of personal reasons, or we had a teacher who was then moved to another school. And so I was just trying to find a way to get more of a district presence in the program to ensure that it stays going. And the other, and the middle school as well. So for the elementary, the K-4 schools, it's first Lego League Junior, and then for the upper and middle, they have first Lego, and that's where they actually go and compete. And then we were also talking in the fall last year at budget time, well, it wasn't this table, but it was this meeting, about getting more opportunities for STEM into the curriculum, not just as after-school programs. And so very happily, we were able to put a STEM line item in the technology budget for the 2018 and 19 school year, so I want to thank you guys for that very much. So going into the year, we had 1 team at Mastercola, 4 at Reed's, and then there were 8 at Thornton's. We ended up with 5 teams at the upper elementary for first Lego, and then we had 1 team at the middle school. But the other development at the middle school is we had a family move into town from another state who was very active in first technical challenge. And I actually have a photo in a little bit of the robot used for that. And it's sort of, it's more robotics oriented, but not quite as freeform as the first robotics challenge at the high school. And so they started a first technical challenge. So we had a Lego team and an FTC team at the middle school. And so that was a new development, which I can take no responsibility for. And this was, I helped out a lot with the Mastercola Elementary team. I'll say this many times over. It's hard to get parents to help coach. We need volunteers. That's how a lot of these after-school programs run. That's true for Destination Imagination as well. So I stepped in and helped with the coaching, and this was a group. They were all 3rd grade except for the little guy on the right who was in kindergarten, and they worked as a team. They were all equal members. They contributed what they each had their strength. That's one of the nice things about FIRST, especially at this level, is everybody has something that they can do that adds to the performance of the team. And this is at the expo. So in January, all the Lego junior teams came together from Merrimack and had their expo, and so they would set up and show how they solved their problem. This year's theme was around water, solving problems around and for with water. The team there on the left are the upper elementary team that advanced beyond the regional tournament. And that's first Lego, so that's where they start competing there at the upper elementary. And then on the right shows the first technical challenge robot. So it's more of a defined kit, but then they can do a lot of different things to customize it and make it solve the problem that is part of the challenge for the year. So they brought that robot, and the first robotics team brought their robot to the expo. So the younger kids also got to see what they could potentially move up to, and they also got to see the older kids and interact with that. I also recruited high school kids to come and help. At the expo, they do a presentation. It's not competitive, but they go around and they ask questions of each team and what they did. And I had a lot of high school kids who came and volunteered to do that, as well as people from the community. So that's mostly the focused on FIRST. And then right as we were kind of in the middle of the season, the commissioner announced a fund for helping to fund getting robotics programs into schools, and we put in an application, but we didn't get any of that money because it was a smaller amount of money, and it was more on a needs, like districts that were more in need. And so because they had so many more applicants than they could fulfill, they were able to secure Title IV money from the federal government aimed at robotics and other areas that improve school culture and help with different kinds of learning approaches. So we applied for that in round 2, and we were awarded, as that bottom line shows, $43,000. And so with that, not only will we be able to, and this is to be used through the end of 2019, so we'll be able to do more with FIRST, with both the Lego and the junior and the regular. We're moving to newer core robots, which are expensive, so we're able to invest in that and having enough kits so that all the teams have their own sets, and we can also use them during the school year. It will help with registrations and things like that, but we're also using the funds to just get more STEM and STEAM related equipment into the schools. And another big thing that I'm going to show you is we're working on helping teachers get more comfortable in this area and develop their own skills. And I was happy to hear when they said that the math program has resulted in some productive struggle for the teachers, because a lot of what I've been working on is putting teachers out of their comfort zone to work in these areas where they're just a little bit outside, and trying to find ways that they can connect what kids learn through robotics and engineering and design to math and science and the arts, and to make sure that they're as they're learning that it's relevant. That's a big part of the concern. And then I also wanted to mention, I think that we've talked at this table about the support we've had from the town trustees in renovating the libraries. We did Master Cola, and then we did Reed's Ferry's library, and then Thornton's Ferry, and then this last year we did the upper elementary. In addition to that, they provided $50,000 to support STEM education for grades K through 8. So with that, we were able to buy iPads for the lower level schools, Android tablets for the upper and the middle, carts for those to go in, and then some different kinds of Lego kits to allow different kinds of exploration that's not specifically challenge-based, which is what the FIRST program tends to be. So thanks to them. And so now we're working on just kind of growing the program, and how do we find ways to get more of these kinds of activities and hands-on learning experiences into the classroom. So one way to do that is to work with teachers. So on June 5th, I took a group of 22 teachers by bus to Watertown, Massachusetts, where we went to visit. We were a larger group than anticipated, so we went to a makerspace. But we were hosted by Educator, which is a company founded by teachers that They sell maker ed kinds of products, robotics and things that you can make things with. But they're very tied into the educational aspect of all of the different products. And so they created a playground for the teachers to just explore. And then we had part of the day to work on application. What would you do with this? What could you teach? And it was a K through 12 group, and they worked across the grade levels. They worked across schools. And I have some photos of that. And so they are challenged to take what they did there and develop that further and to actually have some of these opportunities available in the classroom next year. And the Title IV grant paid for the trip, but it also helped pay for some equipment from that company that we can then come back. And we're working on creating, within the library program, a sort of a maker ed lending library so that if 5 people ordered one of the, like a Sphero robot, then we can put them in the program and know that those 5 could go out together and be more useful to a class than one. So we're they actually purchased in a way to take advantage of some volume. So I thought that was nice that they immediately went that direction. And then in the end of June, we're working on offering play shops, which is essentially a free-form workshop. We did this a couple years ago, and it was very highly regarded, where we just put out different kinds of technology, and they had 2 days. We offered it over 4, and so teachers had 2 days that they could come in and just experiment and play, and they tended to organize themselves in groups and come in and just play with the technology, look at what kind of connections they could make. So it's that, but taking it to the next level of what will you actually do with this next year in the classroom. I will say that from that workshop a couple years ago, there's a lot of things that they played with that I know have been used in the classrooms because they tend to invite me to come see, which is my favorite time. And then also continue more workshops in the summer and through next school year. Most of the lower elementary schools have a tech committee, and so they actually have a mechanism in place where they can kind of keep working on these things as they go. And so one of my goals will be to work with the upper and middle schools to help kind of create that organization to help things move through there. Another thing that will be coming down the pike is at the middle school, the tech ed program will need to be rethought because the modules are going to the end of their life. And the teacher, Chris Whiteman, has a lot of very good ideas to bring it more current, to do a lot more with like what we saw there. And I sat with him on the way back, and he's got a lot of really good ideas that I think kids are going to be very excited about. So here are some photos from our Eduporium field trip. So you can see they had robotics, they had coding. So Mark McLaughlin and Kim Yarla, the principal at Reed's Ferry, were also there with us for part of the day. So you can see they just set up different workstations around the room and they were supposed to rotate, but I think that Arena, our host, figured out how hard it is to manage teachers when they're in the learning environment. So they had to actually be sort of forcibly moved onto different stations without, hyper-focusing. We could have easily spent a lot more time. And I don't know if you can see that the teacher, Arena is the one on the lower left that's kind of got her back. She's one of the founders of Eduporium. And Ashley Meehan, who was one of the space camp teachers, has her finger in a glass of water because they're playing with makey-makeys, which are a tool for playing with circuitry and coding. And so they're talking about whether or not she can conduct electricity when her finger's in the water. And I just love the look on her face because she's asking questions and she has the same look that I can envision a student having. And then in the upper right are a couple of teachers from Reed's Ferry, a music teacher and a classroom teacher. And those little blocks are all, they have different kinds of logic, such as sensors and lights and different things. And when you connect them, they go through a sequence of instructions. And they were actually working on a music lesson at that point. And here we have Kim Yarlott working with a high school teacher, an elementary librarian, and an elementary music teacher. And they took a robot and programmed him to, that's the upper left, to go around to different stores. They were working on community. And they thought they could do a video for different aspects of a community, like different stores and like a school or a church or a post office, and do little kind of informational pieces, but use the robot as part of the narrator for that. And then the lower right, I love this picture because we have our upper elementary music teacher and a 4th grade teacher from Thornton's Ferry and a high school chemistry teacher collaborating. And the funny thing is that I mistakenly introduced Dr. Campbell as a physics teacher, and she was very quick to tell me she does not teach physics, but the lesson that they did that day was physics. They did one on slope with a robot. And so I had to give her a hard time for that. And the little blue ball in front of Dr. Campbell is a robot. It's a Sphero robot, and they can do all different kinds of things. And one of the things that's neat about those is that they gather data as they go. So you can program it to do things, and then you can capture how far it went, how long it took, and the altimeter and all kinds of information. So a lot of things I had never seen before, so it was very exciting. And there we have a learner on our left who was obviously involved in productive struggle, working with. The funny thing about this is as he was playing with this, that little box, the wooden box up on the top, is a robot. And he was playing and putting together the pieces, not recognizing that he was programming that robot. And he kind of thought that the movement of the robot was just incidental and not related to him. so it was kind of fun. But I think it was also, I would like to say that I think it was very good for the teachers to see some of the administrators there digging in, getting uncomfortable, playing, and seeing what the application was for this. And I think that we model learning at all levels. And one of the things that I really liked, Irina, the founder, talked about was teachers would benefit from thinking less about being the sage on the stage or the expert and the more experienced learner. So maybe just more experienced with the trial and error, or maybe more experienced with what you might learn from something, but that the class can learn together and teachers can learn from students. She talked about that a lot. And that's a discussion we've been having internally, is how do we help educators feel more comfortable learning as they go, as opposed to having mastery before they will start. And then on the right is just a board that we put up to kind of brainstorm what we learned that day and what would be some things that would be hard to do, easy to do, great ideas, transformative ideas. So I just wanted to show that because a day of play can sound like a day of play, but it was very productive and we learned a lot, and I'm very excited for what will come from that. The other thing that I've been trying to do, and when I kind of stuck my foot in the first robotics water in the fall, I kind of wasn't aware of how much time that could take. So I haven't gotten as far as I'd like to with a springtime build-up for the fall programs. So I just set up a form with Mark Merrifield's help on the district website. If you go to the Spotlight, there's a survey there for the students in K-8 or the parents to go in and just sort of do like a lightweight pre-register to just express interest in the first programs, Destination Imagination, Science Olympiad, and then STEM or STEAM clubs that take place within the schools. I also want to mention that with the Title IV, I was able to allocate some funds to help out Destination Imagination. They are a separate organization, but they do have teams in every school, and they are working hard to recruit interest, and it's another one of those programs that you get a good team forming in elementary, and as it goes through, you lose the parent coaches because they go with their team. And I was a coach for a very long time before we moved back into Merrimack, and was aware of how hard it was to recruit parents. And I, for a while, coached 2 teams, and don't recommend that. So if anybody just is willing to step up, you don't have to know a whole lot. It's more about being there and supporting the students and making sure that they're fed. A lot of times the programs are very self-driven. Destination Imagination is entirely student-driven, and FIRST has a lot of, the students really own what they do. That was the other thing I like to hear about the Envision Math program, is the amount of student ownership of the work. And that's what we're trying to do with STEAM, is to give students the opportunity to really explore and find different ways to learn. And then I also just wanted to mention, as you saw when the high school was here, Sean Mueller and Amy Piccolo have become grant writers, and they have secured funds from Title IV, so I'm assisting with that because it's a fairly involved process to use Title IV funds. And they also got a grant from the Lions Club, and they also got one from NISTE. And I feel a little remiss because I know the Reed's Ferry, there's a group of teachers and the librarian at Reed's Ferry also have won an award to do some personalized learning from NISTE. So we have some grant writers in our midst, so that's kind of exciting. But their work with experimental photography, I think, is a phenomenal example, and I'm looking very much forward to watching how that develops because, no pun intended, because not only are they teaching a class that intersects chemistry and photography, they're going to be building the camera obscuro / darkroom trailer, so they're looking to do outreach. They're involving the different departments in the creation of that device, and they just are crossing a lot of boundaries, which is, I think, one of the things I've been trying, along with Dr. McLaughlin, to work on over the last few years, is how do we help students not see the world in math and ELA and science, but that these all interrelate. And as we've had these discussions, it's interesting how much the teachers who've been here for a while are kind of dusting off their roots working with theme-based learning with the standards on top, and it's coming back, and it's very natural. And I'm just trying to build that capacity. So this isn't my program, this is more recognizing that we just have an opportunity to kind of coordinate and communicate about what we have at our disposal. So that's kind of where we are. We're just sort of at the beginning, but it's been an exciting year. And then maybe we'll have a lot more to share next year. That's all. Did you have questions?
I bet they do. I see Cinda.
Thank you so much for that overview and bringing us up to speed on some of these initiatives. And first and foremost is thank you for sharing what I would call a field trip for teachers.
Yeah.
And so I wondered if you could tell me just a little bit about how we selected the group of teachers, well, not just teachers, but we're talking about a cross section of school employees, right? We're talking administrators and, for when you went to the Eduporium?
Well, it was actually the 22 was teachers. The administrators self-selected and got themselves there. They did not ride the bus.
Okay.
However, and I was very glad to have them there. What I did, I've kind of formed this Merrimack STEAM engine, kind of just like to make it kind of interesting, and for lack of a better word, club, where I'm just trying to communicate about these different kinds of opportunities and programs and just getting thinking going in this direction. It's informal, and it's K through 12 or pre-K through 12. So I formed the club, and it was through outreach to the building administrators, the librarians, and the tech educators that I work with. And then different people kind of came through that. And then, honestly, the field trip came about based on who it worked for to be available. The day selection was actually a little bit of magic. We did it at leadership one day. We decided to not do a Monday or a Friday because those are hard days for subs. We didn't do a Wednesday or a Thursday because those are block days. So then teachers would have missed an entire block. So we got a Tuesday. And then we chose a Tuesday at the beginning of the month because that's also easier to get subs. So once we did that, then that kind of helped figure out who could go. So I had probably more interest than I was able to accommodate. But part of the goal is to create capacity and to do a lot of information sharing. And what I was so thrilled about is that as we started looking at what the different product options were with the budget that we had, they immediately started talking about how to make sure that everything was available to everybody, that this wasn't just, I get this and take it back and it's mine. Nobody even seemed to think that at all.
Well, and I would say, as a district, we want to continue to be, and we've said it at this table many a times, is a culture of learning. And that's for every district employee and for the district as a whole to be able to grow and to learn. So I feel like that trip supports that philosophy of, so it sounds like there's a lot of, that group can help with a lot of change management, a lot of train the trainer, a lot of seeing new things that can be incorporated. And I think you're exactly right when you start to speak of the interdisciplinary class with the chemistry and the photography and really where more of those traditional barriers are becoming more fuzzy, maybe more of the Stanford model I think is where there's a lot of work being done there. And so, not a discussion for today, but just a side note right here is in the future, I'd like to the board and administration to consider more interdisciplinary opportunities that can reach more of our student base as well as our teachers to be able to join and do those interdisciplinary classes so that we can get more students being able to take advantage of those opportunities. And then lastly, I had a question regarding, we've heard a lot about the Envision program over the last couple board meetings. And one thing I wanted to check with you is, or I wanted to at least say, is to make sure that we have the right technology to support that. Do we have the right, because it's obviously we're transitioning to a more technology-based program, and now that we're in the process of implementing it, do we see any gaps with our budget gaps and whatnot? And if we do, I know you would bring that to our attention, but I would just say as a heads up, it wouldn't surprise me if we didn't have that exact match. And if we need to support that as the board through the budget process or anything else, to please let us know so that we have the right resources to be able to make this program as successful as it can be.
Mark? Oh, sorry.
Well, it started as a question and kind of ended as a statement, but I would like to say
all of my thoughts, I took it out there. So.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, what I was going to say is that the demand for devices has grown. At the end of this summer, based on what we're able to do with the operational budget and the CIP, we will be very close between 2.5, so one device to 2.5 students to 3 students, depending on the school. So I've been working on equity for that. We have had some opportunities with parent group donations and through the trustees and things like that we have more devices, but we're not at a 1-to-1 yet. So what happens is the teachers who want to use Envision on the laptops will either schedule the lab or they'll schedule access to one of the different kinds of mobile devices in their building. I have heard, this is true for reading, this is true for writing, it's not just math, but having a more digitally based program it's almost as though as we increase devices, the demand keeps going up. It's the same thing with the wireless. So I'm very grateful for what we're able to do for next year. I think that getting to the point of the ratios that we're at is a really great thing. And we're just going to keep growing in that direction. So.
Yeah, so definitely when we get to budget season, I know we'll discuss this more and kind of, where we are with the CIP or where there might be some gaps of resources that we might need a little bit, whatever that balance is. I know you'll address it when we get to that point in time. But I just want you to know that I'm really excited about what's happening in the district around the STEAM initiatives, and so you have my support.
Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you. I wanted to just go back briefly to the point you raised, Cinda, about sort of how was it, or the question you asked rather about how was it that certain teachers got to go to Eduporium and so on. So Nancy answered, and I just wanted to elaborate on it. So what we're really trying to be about in Merrimack is define a future. And we're going in this direction. We're going towards more inquiry. We're going towards interdisciplinary. And when an opportunity like that came up, we throw that out, Nancy throws that out there, and we have realized that when a person is ready to accept a challenge about where we're going, then they will self-select and they will come and they will make it work. Just like the day that you were at PERC and Amy Piccolo and Sean Mueller came, and their energy and excitement is what produced the course that is now underway that's getting so much recognition. There's no way that could have happened had it been mandated. You will work with him or he will work with you, and you make this magic. So what we're trying to do is to create a sense in the district of forward momentum. We're going here, and one way or another, one day or another, people are going to hop on the train because it's leaving the station. And so when more of these opportunities arise, more and more teachers are looking left and looking right and seeing colleagues doing innovative things and saying, I'll go to that one now. But that becomes much more genuine and transformative than if we were to say, I want you to go to this next week, because there has to be a readiness. But I just wanted to make the point that whether it's going to these opportunities or building interdisciplinary courses and whatever, it's clearly been articulated to the teachers. This is the direction, and when they hop on the train, it has to be right for them. But we're leaving the station, so.
I think what you're saying is that in this particular case, there were some early adopters, perhaps.
Correct.
That raised their hand and said this genuine curiosity about some of the innovation that might be offered.
And then yes, that's exactly right. And then you rightly anticipated how they're going to be leveraged. So then those are the people who then talk to colleagues and say, you've got to do this thing. It was unbelievable. It was really fun. More ideas than I could even imagine for a whole year to use. And then those people then can be leveraged as trainers and as advocates. So it works in the way that you said, but it starts with those early adopters.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments from the board?
Can I add one last thing, just real quick?
Of course you can.
One thing, and my last slide, I jumped right over it. One of the things that I did this year was Milford, which has a CTE incorporated into their high school, did a STEAM night, and I think it was their second annual STEAM night. So they had students from 3rd to 8th grade brought in for the evening by their parents. They sat down and they had a introduction of this is what we're doing, and then the kids rotated through 2 90-minute hands-on learning experiences throughout their building. And so some of them were in their laser cutting lab and robotics lab, and they've got different resources right in their building because they're a tech education center. But one of the things that I found so compelling about it was that they educated the parents. They actively recruited girls and kids who were not always the highest academic performers, but for whom those hands-on experiences were very meaningful. They had members of the community leading events. They had the public librarians were there running one of the sessions, and it really had a really strong sense of community. And so I went to see how this all went because I would really like to try to replicate that kind of an event here. And also learn from them because they've learned a lot as they've done this a couple of years now. And so I just wanted to mention that that's one of the things that I would really like to work on, and I will be looking for helpers. So just wanted to share that, and I apologize for interrupting.
You're fine, absolutely. This is your time. And I was remiss earlier to say that it's finals week, and so Student Rep Puzzo is doing his thing, and he is studying for finals and prepping for that. But this is something that I hope he does get to watch after he's done with finals. And being a big robotics student, he's very involved with the first robotics chop shop team. So with that, I know this would have been a presentation he would have definitely been on the edge of his seat with great questions as well. But this is exactly what that's going to foster. So with that, some props to Chris, who is studying hard right now as we speak. So.
Well, and I also would want to just, I did think about this. A lot of the focus is on K-8 for the development of the different opportunities, and that's largely because by the time students are in high school, they're sort of self-selecting what they're doing. So I didn't want it to sound like we're not doing anything for the high school. It's just that most of the focus is recruiting students via the parent, and there's less of that in the high school. There is, Science Olympiad at the high school, and obviously FIRST Robotics, and one of the people that has come forward and really worked with me a lot is Carolyn Wordham, who's overseeing tech ed and art and looking for ways to make good connections. And in a dialogue that we had in mid-May, she talked about how important art is to these different disciplines because art tells the story that you do with science and technology and engineering and math. And that's so true. And if you don't tell that story, then there's fabulous things that happen that we don't necessarily know about. So she's been helping make those connections. So just a lot of really, really interesting voices coming together.
So, excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Yes. And have a good summer if we don't see you before then.
Thank you. You too.
We are on to item number 5, which is the fourth quarter curriculum review with Mark.
Thank you. What a great night to do a fourth quarter curriculum review, because there are, I think, so many themes that are kind of coming together. Some of them you heard from teachers, some of them you heard from students, some of them you heard from Nancy in her presentation. So it's actually a better summation than I could have actually hoped for. So before I talk to you about the content work that's being done, I thought it was kind of helpful to just start by talking a little bit about some of the givens that Merrimack operates under when it comes to curriculum development. And by givens, I mean, in a district of any size, but certainly in a good-sized district like we have, where you have multiple schools and thousands of students, there have to be some agreements, some common understandings that teachers operate under, so that students can have somewhat of a familiar experience as they move through the grades. So inasmuch as we try to differentiate and try to have really personalized service for students more and more and more, there are also certain things that we have to agree on, because students move. Students don't always stay in kindergarten, and they don't always stay in 5th grade or beyond. I mean, they move. And so the more that teachers have agreements about certain fundamental things, the easier it is for a student to negotiate a system. So I'll give you an example of some of those givens. In Merrimack, it's really no longer a choice for teachers at any grade level. There has to be differentiation. That's a standard practice now, and we have expressed in a number of ways, and will continue to do so, that it's not the prerogative of some teachers to differentiate and not others. Differentiation has to be something that is part and parcel of anything we do. So when we develop curriculum in Merrimack, we do so with the idea that it will be differentiated. And the simple reason for that is because, I think you saw tonight, no two student brains work exactly alike. They're like snowflakes. Every snowflake that falls doesn't look exactly like the one that fell just beside it. And students are really very much like that. And so we have to differentiate so that we can attend to the needs that they have uniquely. Assessment is not just for reporting progress anymore. You heard several of our teachers saying it tonight. The most traditional way to look at assessment is to be able to report progress so that parents and students just know at a given point in time how a student is doing. That's very important. But you heard people tonight say that the almost more important, or I'll take the almost back, the more important part of assessment is so that it provides the teacher with information about that student so that they can act on it. It's supposed to be actionable. So I've used this before, this metaphor before, but I'll remind people again. If a person presents with an illness and goes to the doctor, there is an assessment of the symptoms, an assessment of what's presented, and then, because it's not a perfect science, a good doctor will apply some sort of remedy of some sort, but never knows when he or she does that if that remedy, whether it's a prescription for medication or physical therapy or whatever, never knows for sure if that's the combination of things that will help the person to regain their health. And so there's a period of time where that remedy is applied, and then another assessment is taken. Sometimes we have to take blood again. Sometimes we have to go back and get a test again to see whether the medication or the treatment is working. Our schooling can't be any different. We can't just teach in a vacuum. There has to be a way to assess, is what we're giving working? And if it isn't, what do we need to do differently? And the presumption is people will do it differently. So the curriculum initiatives in Merrimack are all predicated on the idea that assessment is integral to what we do, so that a teacher can intake data and then have it be actionable and do something different in their instruction as a result of that. So that's a common agreement. And again, by common agreement, I mean there aren't bodies of teachers in Merrimack who are kind of allowed to use assessment that way and others who say, oh, that's not really for me. That doesn't mean that that isn't what happens, but what I'm saying is when we work constructively as curriculum committees and in all the ways that we interact with teachers, we express that expectation. Inquiry is a given. I alluded to it a little while ago. Several years ago, we introduced across the district a foundational idea that classrooms are going to be based on an inquiry model of instruction. And why is that? I mean, we've said it, but it's worth saying again why as we look at the end of the year. Why? Because it's as important or more important that a student understands what he or she is learning and owns what he or she is learning than that they just simply can report that they learned something. So there has to be a way, and you saw tonight, students were able to explain and understand through their own natural inquisitive nature what it is that they were being exposed to in math in this case, beyond just, worksheet, drill and kill exercises. All of our curriculums are developed on the understanding by design curriculum model. We've talked about this for years, but again, it's worth talking about briefly because what understanding by design does is focus on the big ideas so that students can understand what they're getting out of the experience beyond just facts and formulas. Because we don't want to be a district that creates students who say years later, oh, right, I had that Spanish class, and I can only remember how you conjugate verbs, but I couldn't be able to begin to speak. We want students to know why they're taking a class and what it means for them in the real world, in the practical world. And so understanding by design is a focus for our efforts in that regard. You heard some allusion to this tonight, and it's worth saying again. All of our curriculum work in Merrimack is developed by teams of teachers representing all grade levels. So why is that important? Because students move. Students move. Eventually they'll get to first grade, and then they'll get to second grade, and then they'll get to 5th and 8th and 11th grade. And as they move, the curriculum has to evolve with them. And it can't be that what you learn is because you have Mrs. Guglielmi. What you learn has to relate to the standards at the grade level that you have, and that it has to build one upon the other upon the other. And the way that happens is when teachers develop curriculum, they do so as a group. So you saw examples that Nancy showed tonight of a music teacher, a 4th grade teacher, and a high school chemistry PhD all working together to understand some science concepts and technology concepts so that the 4th grade teacher can interpret those at the developmental stage that she's working with kids at, and then the high school teacher can do so at her stage. The other given, or another given, but one of the most important givens that we talk a lot about is student voice. And that's not just a nothing statement. Student voice is something that we really are aspiring to, and I think you have good evidence of it tonight. Students have interests. Students have to be able to say what works for me and what doesn't work for me, and they have to be able to speak about that. And so curriculum is developed with the idea that students have a voice in their learning and in their education. And I think you're beginning to see some of the fruits of that, at least with some of the students here tonight. So I just wanted to start our conversation tonight just by talking about those givens, because that's really what defines all the work that we've been about and will continue to be about. So as a practical matter, as the year ends, what have we been up to? I think at the last meeting I indicated to the board that we would commence a world language curriculum committee. That's happened. That's grades 5 through 12. We've never had a 5 through 12 world language committee before. It's being led by Angela Meslanka, who is the world language department head at the high school. But we had the two world language teachers from the upper elementary school, the team from the middle school, and from the high school. And the purpose for capturing that meeting before the end of this year is so that we had all the parts in place and we were ready to kind of rock and roll, and so we did, so that when we get to September, we can hit the ground running. It was a fantastic meeting. The meeting was spent really getting to know each other, because fifth grade teachers and high school people, upper elementary school people and high school people have never been in the same room together. They don't know each other from Adam. They don't know what each other thinks about world language instruction or what values they bring to it. And so before we develop curriculum, we just got to get the left hand and the right hand working together, talking together, to work out the kinks. Is this what you think about world language instruction? Is this what you think? Where's common ground? So that the common ground doesn't get sort of fought, for lack of a better way to say it, on the backs of students. That work's got to happen beforehand, and that's what we're doing now. I mentioned to you that in the fall we will convene a social studies K through 12 curriculum committee. Both world language and social studies are hitting now because they have both been in place for actually over 10 years. So if you think of a traditional 10-year cycle of review, we're at or past that in both of those. And probably those traditional 10-year cycles are beginning to kind of fade away, and they have to kind of be, I would say we're going to get to a place where curriculum is really, which it is currently, really kind of constantly reviewed, and we're not going to wait 10 years before we kind of look at things again. It just isn't possible with the pace of change in education. Our district mental health committee, I think the board has had a number of exposures to the work of John Fabrizio and Julie DeLuca. That team has been working to evaluate materials that might be implemented at some point in the future to support conversations around social, emotional health and wellness. And I want to just take a pause here to say, why is that important? Because every bit as much as it's important to have a student be physically well when he or she is in a classroom so that they're not distracted by a stomach ache or a headache or any other kind of problem, you have to be ready to learn emotionally as well. And the foundation for the development of the Mental Health Committee was to try to investigate phenomena that seems to be happening not just in Merrimack but across the state and beyond, of students struggling with some pretty significant social and emotional issues. And so we're exploring how we can support students' social and emotional wellness so that they can be ready to learn. Our science curriculum, this is our end of our first year of full implementation of that. Unbelievable how quickly time flies, but that's true. And so right now, the committee is beginning to once again start up its feedback loop. One of the things that was really impressive about the way that committee operated was that once a team of teachers, K to 12, developed strands off of the standards in science, then they were implemented, and then there was a specific series of questions and solicitations of information back to the committee from teachers who actually implemented it in the classroom to say what was working well in the curriculum, what was not working so well, and therefore what needed to be tweaked. And so right now, as this year ends, it's our first opportunity to be able to look broadly K-12 at all of it, to be able to understand that impact and then bring that feedback back to the committee so that they can make adjustments. Teachers have really appreciated that partnership, so even if they haven't been on the committee, they've been able to be involved by providing feedback, and that's going to continue. Language arts, K to 4 is an example of what I was saying a few minutes ago, in that we're not waiting for 10-year cycles for that. We have been blessed with outstanding leadership at the building level, both at the principal and assistant principal level, but also the language arts coordinator, to constantly evaluate the work that we're doing. And so we continue to evaluate word work, phonics, writing, reading, listening, comprehension, all of which is what we define as balanced literacy. And so I don't have a committee report to share with you because that's literally several times a month the language arts coordinators meet together to continue to talk about implementation of all of those parts of our elementary curriculum, the basis for everything that we do in language arts, and I meet with them frequently. We are, in the fall, going to commence a 5 through 12 vertical alignment team between the upper L, middle, and high school to try to establish greater connections between those three schools based on the college and career ready standards, and then to try to determine off of that evaluation whether we need curriculum modifications to what we're currently doing. So that's an innovation from what we've done in the past, and that will start in the fall. We'll have lots more to say to you about that as that kind of evolves. The final thing is math, and I think that we've almost saturated the board tonight and over the last few weeks with information about how math is going this year. And what I would say is, just what I would add rather, is that there are some themes that I think are really important to just kind of pull out of what you heard the last couple of presentations, including tonight, but then last 2 weeks ago as well. We understand that there are multiple ways to get at an answer. And in the past, even currently, but much more so in the past, the only way that we were able to, or students were able to show what they know is with a final answer. Blah, 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 the answer is 52. And what we understand now is that whether or not the answer is 52, your process of getting to that answer means everything in terms of what we need as data, as feedback, to help a student to understand whether there's a more efficient way to get to 52 or whether there's an alternative way if that way was really super hard. So just getting the answer, and that's kind of a controversial thing to say because some people think an answer is an answer is an answer. But what we've learned is that the process by which you get there is as important as anything else. And so this program and the curriculum that supports it is very much tied to that idea. I think you heard multiple times tonight about the power of understanding. And so this math program and the curriculum that supports it is really trying for the first time in a long time to look at the understanding component of what students are doing rather than just the final answer. And that comes off an interesting study that I'll just briefly allude to you. Years ago, a book was published called The Learning Gap that tried to identify differences between a Japanese system of teaching and learning and an American system of teaching and learning. And to make a long story short, what the researchers found is that what was typical in Japanese schools, which are highly successful by some measures, not all measures, but by some measures, is that teachers tended to identify the students in a class who might not have the answer right and call on them and then ask them to walk through a problem, maybe even do so on the board. And at the moment that in the middle of that process a student reflected, this is where I made my mistake, is the teachable moment. In contrast, American education has often been defined by a teacher reviewing work and finding someone in class who's most likely to have gotten that answer right and call on that person, and then the person raises their hand and says the answer and then move on. But now you have 25 students in a class and a good number of those students probably didn't have that same answer. But if you move on to the next problem, assuming everybody got it and not asking or finding and waiting or even focusing on the people who didn't, then you've got a lot of people who just go, okay, not quite sure, but I guess I'll get it sometime. And there was a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes maybe there's a cultural difference. Maybe American teachers didn't want to hurt a kid's feelings and so thought, I'm not going to embarrass you. It's not about embarrassing, which connects to something we talk a lot about in Merrimack, which is trying to fail forward, which is that if you don't know something, you even heard a couple of teachers tonight, Mrs. LaBreche was pretty articulate saying, There are some things that her students are just plain better at than she. And she owned that. She wasn't embarrassed about it, nor should she be. If we're really in an environment where students learn and work together with teachers, then somebody's going to be a little stronger than somebody else. And so that's a basis for our whole curriculum initiative. Last thing I just want to say relative to math has to do with everyday math. There's a general consensus now from students and teachers that of happiness that we've moved on from everyday math. And I just want to say, as an epitaph to everyday math, the following. It is always true that if we are good at what we do, we get better and we keep thinking of new ways to improve on old practices and so on. And everyday math is an example of that. But what everyday math, and I think every teacher in this room would tell you that, what everyday math did for us at the time it was introduced into Merrimack over 10 years ago, was it was the first time that teachers were required to go beyond just the answer and to really get teachers and students to think about the why and the process by which you get that answer. We have taken that experience from 10 years, and I think we found a program that does that now even better. But I don't want the board or the public to think that everyday math didn't serve a purpose. Without it, we wouldn't be able to be where we are now, which is to be able to really support the notion that understanding the process of mathematics is as important as the final answer. And so I just want to thank Everyday Math for it because I don't want people to be under the impression that it was wasted time. It was a point in time, and hindsight's always 20/20. It was a point in time, and it served us well for what it did, and now it's time to move on. But having said that, I think we've had a really productive year, and we're looking forward to a summer where we hit the ground running and continue based on the givens that I've shared with you, and we're just going to keep plugging away and trying to improve. Thank you.
Excellent. Are there any questions on the fourth quarter overview? Seeing none, I would definitely echo what you said about everyday math. I know it was definitely a question that came up a lot when I first got on the board, what's it all about? But in the same token, I think that, again, like we supplemented to make sure that there was automaticity as well, that really that inquiry, that is something that we've always strived year over year to improve on in our performance on standardized testing even, that without that type of a program, we would never have gotten where we are. And also by taking the appropriate level of time to evaluate the curriculum that we're delivering, and who can offer that curriculum and not doing a knee-jerk change for the sake of change, we got the right program. So we did the right due diligence. And it's showing dividends in what we're seeing tonight and our meeting last 2 weeks ago. So keep up the good work on that as far as I'm concerned. So on to item number 6, which is more business than education, but we'll take care of it. So I will turn it over to you, Marge.
Thank you. So Nancy really plays into my hand because there's a nexus between what she was talking to you about and what I'm going to talk about, which is the fact that the Merrimack School District over a long period of time has been committed to applying for federal grants. And the federal grants, really, I want to spell out what those are because I think it's important to reiterate those and to realize just how significant they are. So Title I is funds coming to us to be able to offer a remedial reading and math program. Title II is what we are able to utilize for professional development, and you've heard Mark often refer to the August Academy, and the funding for August Academy comes from that title grant. Project Grow is something that John and Julie are overseeing, which really has to do with our social and emotional learning skills programming. Title IV has 2 components. One is the robotics that Nancy referred to, and we just got notification that there is money for the experiential photography and chemistry combined. So that's Title IV as well. And then the IDEA grant is the grant that John oversees, which helps us with special education funding and also preschool funding. So all of those are our federal grants. And every year we go through an application process to be able to try and continue to access funding. When we go through and get our applications ready, there is always a document that numbers about 20 pages that is called the General Assurances Form. And as the person who is able to sign contracts and do things on the district's behalf, I go through those 20 pages and I read every line, and I ensure that we have policies or protocols or I will call it processes to ensure that if we were audited, and we have been, that we are in fact upholding what is expected if you go forward with a federal grant. So for the last 16 years, I have gone through that process. This year, for the first time, Commissioner Edelblue, via the Department of Education, has requested that all school board members read the general assurances, and that just instead of just the superintendent of the school systems being the one that signs this document, that in fact there be a co-signature, the chairman of the board as well as the superintendent. So I included in your packet the 20-page document that are the general insurances, which has replicated itself over, like I say, the years for the most part. There might be some wording that changed, but for the most part, it's exactly the same. And then I gave you a piece that came from Barrett Christina, who is the executive director of the School Boards Association, because this was just recently asked for by the commissioner, and the deadline is very tight. There was a mistaken date in the cover page. It really should say June 30, not July 30, because you have to have your application submitted and you have to have this general assurances page signed. So given the fact that this is our last meeting, and I literally just found out about this like the first Friday in June, I am asking that you give approval tonight, assuming I can answer your questions, but if so, that you would give approval so that the chair and I could sign this document to be able to submit it with our grant applications and make sure that we are not adhering to the request. So that's why you're seeing this for the first time.
Andy?
So you said that you've been reading this for 16 years. I tried to read through this the first time, and there's a whole lot of detail in here. So I guess the question I have is there anything different about it, given the fact that there's now 2 signatures required?
No, it's in this particular case, and I think that's what took all of my colleagues kind of off guard, is because you're subject to audit. We've gone through audit. Matt can talk to you about that. We just went through an extensive Title I audit and so on. So if there was anything out of the way, you would know about it. But we've always adhered well to it. When we were at an executive meeting of my association, and the commissioner was with us, and we asked him, what is the prompt? Is this coming from the USDOE? Is this coming from the state board? Where is this coming from? And he said, it's my request, and it's because I want school board members to have skin in the game. And so I don't know other than what he said, openly to our meeting. But I think all of us were a little concerned simply because some school boards only meet once a month. I mean, the deadline was quite concerning because I've just outlined all of the federal grants that we go for. And so can you imagine if you couldn't make the date with the general assurances page? You can't put in your application unless you have this with it. So it's just something, I mean, I'm literally sharing with you exactly what was told to me, and there just didn't seem to be reason for that. Do you know what I mean? Unless some district had difficulty, and so now we're all being asked to do the same.
Okay. Cinda?
So I get what you're saying, that we're required to do this, but I'm confused about that just a little bit in the sense of where the state boundaries and the federal boundaries, where there's how our state controlling agency can control how we get federal funds.
So
do
the
you have any
federal
insight
funds
into
come
that?
through the state agency, and then the state agency issues them to us. So a lot of times what will happen is, for example, in the grant that was just rendered to Amy Piccolo and Sean Mueller, there was Title IV money reallocated because not all the districts actually had grants, let's say, that got approved or whatever. So there becomes then a pool of money that gets reallocated. When the money was reallocated, it was then opened up to all the districts, and Amy and Sean applied for that. So it comes from the federal government, X amount, based on a number of factors, and then it's disseminated via the New Hampshire Department of Ed, and then it comes to us, and then we're to implement it. And then every now and again, you'll be audited to ensure that you're adhering to what you said you would do.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Could I comment about the financial piece?
Go ahead, and Naomi, you have a question as well. Good.
Okay.
Okay, yep.
Just looking through the financial criteria here, it says if you have federal awards over $750,000, you're subject to a single audit, et cetera. A single audit, I don't know if you've heard that term, but I've been hearing that term for 20 years, which means it's a very invasive audit where they go and they check everything down to the source documents of the paperwork that could be at the filing cabinet in the special ed office at the middle school. John's been through the single audit, John Fabrizio, as far as. So everything I'm seeing here from a financial standpoint is stuff we already do. We have to give the DOE by March 19th of 2019 a list of all our federal awards and everything like that by account number and everything, which we already do. So a lot of it is, from a financial standpoint, that I've looked through this, is stuff that's already in place.
Okay, Cinda.
So I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, actually, Naomi, the question first.
Just a quick question on it. I'm going to be fine with your motion, but still. So just to do the simple, to see if I'm understanding correctly, this is a set of rules that have to be followed in order to receive the grants that you were talking about earlier.
Even before receiving, apply for.
Mm. And so this is something that we would be doing regardless. They're simply adding another signature line to the last page.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I feel like you're jonesing for a motion, so I will give the floor back to you, Cinda.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to allow the chairman of our board, Shannon Barnes, to be able to be a co-signature on the NHSBA.
The federal grants.
I'm sorry, the federal.
The general assurances form.
The general assurances, terms, and requirements for participation in federal programs.
Excellent. Second by Andy. Any questions or comments? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We're on to item number 7, which is the first reading of a new policy, which is the advanced coursework / advanced placement courses with Mark.
So this is something that is also kind of new. And so I'll just give a brief overview of the background for it, and then we'll get to the policy itself. So for years, Merrimack, like many districts, has offered students dual enrollment for college credit. And that's been a practice that we've been able to provide students with for a long time. And chiefly, the biggest benefit to students and their families is that the awarding of college credit, which some is quite a financial boon later on. Recently, we've been made aware that the governor's has established a STEM scholarship fund, and what that provides for is an opportunity for families to get reimbursed for the tuition they pay for the privilege of being in a dual enrolled course. Previously, that has never happened. This has always been the responsibility of families, and they have paid that money, and then students who've maintained a C or above average have been able to be awarded dual credit. In this particular case, the requirement for allowing a family to qualify for a reimbursement is the establishment of a policy around advanced coursework and advanced placement courses. So in all the years prior, we have not needed this, and because it has not involved money, it's just involved the awarding of credit. But the requirement now is for us to have a policy if our families are able to qualify for a reimbursement. And so the added complication a little bit is that this needs to be adopted by a local school board by June 30th of this year. And so this doesn't allow us to follow a typical pattern of first reading, second review, and a final adoption that would happen over 3 board meetings. This has to be really fast-tracked. And so the thought was that we would read this into the record tonight as a first reading, and then the board would take action if it chose to do so on Wednesday night during the special school board meeting. So I will at this time read the policy, and then after that be happy to take any questions that the board might have. Advanced coursework, advanced placement courses. Any student who is capable of and wishes to do advanced coursework or take advanced placement classes while in high school should be permitted to do so. School district administrators and school counselors will provide assistance to students who wish to enroll in such courses. If advanced coursework or advanced placement courses are not available within the school district, administrators or school counselors are instructed to assist students in identifying alternative means of taking such classes. This may include taking courses through the dual and concurrent enrollment program at a different public school or a private school, through distance education courses or other suitable means. Any student whose eligibility for taking advanced coursework is recommended by his or her counselor may enroll in a course. Credit may be given provided the course comports with applicable district policies and state standards. The district will not be responsible for any tuition, fees, or other associated costs incurred by the student for enrollment in such courses. High school and career technical education center students in grades 11 and 12 may participate in the dual and concurrent enrollment program, through which a student may earn both high school and college credits by enrolling in a course designed by the Community College System of New Hampshire, CCSNH, as part of the dual and concurrent enrollment program. The superintendent shall designate a point of contact for the program who can provide for student counseling, support services, course scheduling, managing course forms and student registration, program evaluation, course transferability, and assisting with online courses. The superintendent or his or her designee shall establish regulations for the program which 1. Require compliance with measurable educational standards and criteria approved by CCSNH. 2. Require that courses meet the same standard of quality and rigor as courses offered on campus by CCSNH. 3. Require that program and courses comply with the standards for accreditation and program development established by the National Alliance for Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships. 4. Establish criteria for student eligibility to participate in the program. 5. Establish standards for course content. 6. Establish standards for faculty approval. 7. Establish program coordination and communication requirements. 8. Address tuition, fees, textbooks and materials, course grading policy, data collection, maintenance, and security, review and expenditure reporting, and a process for renewal of the agreement. 9. Requires annual notification to high school students and their parents of dual and concurrent enrollment opportunities. The legal references are RSA 188-E:25 through RSA 188-E:28 and ED 306-141A and 6, Advanced Course Work. So I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
And I see Andy and Cinda so far.
So obviously the the rationale for doing this policy is to be able to say that we have a policy that states this, that ultimately allows parents to be able to go for reimbursement for any tuition that they pay towards this college credit. That's the methodology behind it.
That's correct.
However, this policy requires a whole lot of regulation establishment to be done. You're answering my question before I ask it. Are all of these requirements already something that we do in Merrimack that we don't have to redo or change or do extra work for?
I would say that almost all of these are things that we currently do.
Thank you.
Given the time constraint, I'm wondering, if it's possible, if the board was agreeable to it, to approve this or to put it on consent for our Wednesday meeting versus the second reading. And then if there's any changes, we could, I think, deal with a policy review if there was, but I don't see anything in here that, I get why we have to do it. I think it seems pretty sort of straightforward. And if we could just put it onto consent, is that possible?
Go ahead.
So they're really, it's a different agenda because your really only item was to interview candidates. And so what we would just do is just do a consent line because that's the only thing you're doing Wednesday night. But we were so glad that you were meeting a second time because otherwise we would have just had to try and have a special board meeting because there's just no other way we can get this done. So I think we can put it under consent. I will say this, just as I'm sitting here reading listening to Mark read, and he and I both edited this, and I have found two things that need to be removed. I think you were marking it too. So we'll make those edits. I want you to know that, and we'll put a revised copy in front of you Wednesday night so you see those edits, if that's all right. But otherwise, if the board's willing, that's the way we'll list it on a modified agenda, a revised agenda.
Do we have to make a motion then for that?
No, I'll just move it there.
We'll just put it on the agenda.
Because I'm going to do a new agenda tomorrow morning.
And I think we're good. So we'll do a second review and we'll just do an adoption. So we'll just skip the second review and go straight to consent.
Put adoption. Yeah.
Excellent. It's atypical, I would say, but it's definitely, I think, founded. Naomi, you have a comment?
I like this plan. I like doing it. I wonder whether it might not, would it ruin the process that we're trying to do if we pass it and then review it in that?
I think any policy is up for review and refinement whenever we see the need. That's the main part of our job. So if we ever feel we need a refinement to it, and
then we can just
do that
address
at a
it.
future meeting. Andy, you had another comment? Question?
So you handed us two pieces of paper tonight. One's the policy, which we've talked about and I think we're all in agreement on. The other is an agreement between the college system and the Merrimack School District.
Yep.
I know it's not necessarily an agenda, but I'd like to know what this is because it talks about things and that requires the board and the superintendent to sign.
Right. So there are two requirements in order to be able to qualify for reimbursement for parents using this newly established scholarship fund. One is the adoption of this policy by the local school board, and two, it would be as you pointed out, Andy, the signing of this agreement between the signing of this agreement by the board chair and the superintendent. So that's a requirement in order to be able to allow families to qualify for this. So the agreement is really just a technical document that says really pretty much what the policy stipulates, but just is, kind of, again, a requirement put forth that we are just learning about.
But I will say that within that, I quickly read through this. It does talk about requirements that instructors within the school district have to have and tie in and stuff. But I know this is stuff that we've done in the past. So the question is there anything in this agreement that would cause incremental work for the district to do beyond just formalizing the relationship?
There really isn't, because right now, when the biggest responsibility has always been for teachers to maintain, good records and to be able to maintain contact with the participating schools, so that they can affirm that a student, attended the requisite number of classes, followed the required assignments, and ultimately got a grade of C or above. So there has to be a good amount of record keeping. There's a point of contact for each department that has courses that are for dual enrollment, and that point of contact makes contact with representatives from the community college system of New Hampshire every year. That largely is contained in this agreement that you're referring to. The only difference now is that students, in addition to getting credit, will also be able to get a reimbursement. So this document doesn't ask teachers to do really anything different than they have already been doing for years without a policy and without this agreement. And so it just codifies it, I guess, because it's a requirement of the state so families can get their reimbursements.
Okay. Are you yielding at this point, Andy?
I just wanted to make a comment that if we're truly hearing about these this late in the game, that I think we as a board, my suggestion is that we feed back to the State Department of Education the lateness of some of these things in order to achieve. So.
Okay. Marge?
In this particular case, I wouldn't want that done because it was my oversight. So the state should not be blamed for my oversight.
Okay. Thank you.
And Cinda?
Would we just need to do a motion for you to be able to sign this as well, or?
If you want to, you can do this on Wednesday night. I think it might be a good thing to approve the policy under consent and sign this off of it, because one goes to the other.
Okay.
So you're going to approve, so I would prefer that this come after you do that.
Okay.
Okay. So, on to item number 8, which is a request for the board to provide a letter of recommendation for the NHSBA grant application. In your packets, you'll see a request from the director of the NHSBA, Barrett Christina. They're looking to seek some funds from the Nellie Mae Foundation that focus on increasing access to high-quality extended learning opportunities and increasing student leadership for college and career readiness. Obviously, the NHSBA offers these services and more for their members, and getting additional resources will help to further their efforts. It's to get this grant, one of the requirements are 3 letters of recommendation. So there was a reach out to the board of directors to see if we can write letters on behalf of our boards endorsing their request for the funding. And I drafted and put in your packets a sample, well, actually the draft letter. And if it works for you, I'd be glad to sign off on that. So are there questions about the grant, the function, or the ability to send a letter? I will start with Andy.
So first question is, has this ever been required before?
It's a grant, so they're just pursuing new monies.
Right, but this is the first time they've ever pursued this grant?
From my knowledge, yes.
Okay. And do you know how many other boards are doing the same thing?
I know that we have to vote as boards, so I know there are 2 other boards that have meetings before the deadline, which is June 30th, which is all the rage tonight. So on that note, there are 2 other boards that are meeting before the deadline that put it on their agendas. So are there other questions? Naomi?
I think it's a fine thing that they're going for this. I am wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, can we as a board write letters of recommendation for other organizations? How does that fall within our responsibilities and things we're allowed to do?
I don't think there's anything that opposes us from doing it. We are a member organization, and with that benefit will come benefit back to us, obviously, with the resources that we can procure from that development of work from the funding. So if anything, I don't think that ever doesn't come up. So, and I think, so as a member, I think it's just one of the things we can do. So.
I'm just wondering if we should read the letter just for the public.
Sure, we can do that. So let me go to the last page. So, if approved, the letter will be sent to Jessica Rodriguez Boudreau, Reaching Higher New Hampshire. It's Ms. Rodriguez Boudreau. The Merrimack School Board is proud to support the New Hampshire School Board Association's application for consideration of funds for your RFP. Our membership in the organization provides us great insight into the benefits of funding that funding could provide the NHSBA and its members based on our approved platform and vision as voted on in our delegate assembly meeting. As NHSBA members, we utilize the benefits of our membership in many areas, including getting legal guidance on school board policies, getting trainings and orientations on critical areas of school board governance, and getting updates on work happening in Concord through our elected bodies and the Department of Education that impact how we deliver public education locally. Many of these benefits include content in the area of extended learning opportunities, alternative course credit options, competency-based grading systems, and distance learning. These are all critical areas for local school boards to have up-to-date knowledge and support systems to be able to be responsive to the changing educational landscape. We are fortunate to have talented staff at NHSBA to assist us in these areas, and the additional resource of funding will allow them to extend their capabilities to our board and member boards around the state. We appreciate your consideration of NHSBA's application and request you accept their request in the affirmative for this funding opportunity. Sincerely, Shannon M. Barnes, Chair, Merrimack School Board, President, New Hampshire School Boards Association. Andy?
I think it's important for not only to have that letter, but the letter doesn't really say what the NHSBA is intending to do. But if the board is okay, can I read the 2 lines of what they want to do with this grant?
Sure.
Because essentially what they're doing is the SBA, New Hampshire School Board Association, is trying to receive one of the Nellie May Foundation grants of $5,000 each. They plan on submitting a grant proposal that touches on either one or both of the following topics: increasing access to high-quality extended learning opportunities and increasing student leadership for college and career readiness. So in my mind, these are both grants that would be applied to things that would be beneficial. They're not lobbying, they're not doing anything weird that I think that these are 2 things that we could benefit from. So in that regard, I support the letter because of what they're applying for.
Are there other questions or comments? Does the letter pass muster, I should say? Excellent. I do, kind of.
Okay. I move that we empower the chair of this board to sign the letter of recommendation as read.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Cinda. Questions or comments to the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. We are on to item number 9, which is the approval of the June 4th, 2018 minutes. Motion to approve. Andy, second. Naomi, any edits to the minutes? Cinda.
Okay, page 1, line number 44 and 45. It says, Board Member Gualyumi asked how the half-day kindergarten impacts the first grade math instruction and what practices educators use to address this. I'd like to modify it to say, Board Member Gualyumi asked how the half-day kindergarten impacts the first grade math instruction because materials are based on full-day kindergarten, and what practice educators use to address any gaps that might exist. Then, page 2, line number 49, Educator Roswag, I'm going to start reading at 47, but my change is on 49. Educator Roswag responded that the year began with students needing more assistance with word problems, and the independent practice was a whole group guided practice. Students eventually were able to read more on their own, and then I just added at the end as the year progressed. Page 5. Line number 209. It says, Board Member Gualyumi expressed her support for the homework protocol. And then I just am adding, and understands optimization will be ongoing and communication can be improved. Page 7. Line number 290. Board Member Gualyumi would like to see a future agenda item that looks at summer schedules specifically for band and sports. And then I just wanted to add there as well and say, and have it posted in a more timely manner so parents can best plan their family summer activities.
Are there any other edits for the minutes? Seeing none, we'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. Item number 10 is the acceptance of gifts and grants under $5,000 with Matt.
Thank you. This evening we have a gift from Wentworth Place Association, the Wentworth Place Association, on Coventry Court in Merrimack, New Hampshire, in the amount of $401.44. It's to address the needs of the homeless students by providing supplies, and it's going to be under the discretion of our homeless liaison, Jody Hanley. So we thank them for that generous donation. We put it before you this evening.
Thank you. Andy?
I move that we accept this donation on behalf of the Merrimack School District with our sincere thanks.
Is there a second? Seconded by Naomi. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. On to item number 11, which is consent with Mark.
Excuse me. So on consent tonight, we have the following educator resignation. Jennifer Pelletier, 5th grade teacher at Mastrocola Upper Elementary School. And we have the following nominations. Kara Cave, preschool coordinator. Kayla Daly, kindergarten teacher at Thorntons Ferry Elementary School. Katie Finken, speech teacher at Reeds Ferry Elementary School. And Megan Pearson, grade 2 teacher at Mastrocola Elementary School.
Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda? Andy?
I move we accept the consent agenda as read.
Is there a second? Seconded by Cinda. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. And the motion carries 4-0-0 with one that was a little slow on the get up.
Reading ahead.
Reading ahead. Item number 12, other. Is there any correspondence to come before the board? Seeing none. Comments from the board? Yes, Harge.
I just want you to know that we have a teacher, Alice Donahoe, who you remember was chosen as in the top 8 for New Hampshire Teacher of the Year. We've just been notified that she's now gone to the top 5. So, pretty good. We're moving forward.
Very good. Congratulations, Alice. And Mark?
So I just wanted to follow up on Board Member Gualyumi's request relative to summer schedules, particularly for band and sports. And so I've reached out to Athletic Director Mike Susi and also Band Director Pat Cunningham. And in both cases, they have been able to get their schedules out to families, and they have, in the case of, so those students have them. In the case of Mike Susi, not every sports schedule is completed yet because it's a question of finding coaches and then getting the coach schedule developed. However, the larger question really has to do with the ease of which parents can access those schedules. So in the case of the sports schedules, if you go to the main page of the high school and click athletics and then further click, you would be able to select the sport and then see the schedule. In the case of band, there is no page on the district website for those schedules. So I'm going to work with Mark Merrifield and be able to add a tab to the high school site that publishes that. But really the larger issue I think that Board Member Guglielmi points out is the intuitiveness or lack of intuitiveness of the district website when it comes to some information like that. So Mark Merrifield, I think, does an outstanding job of really building a great website, and it's an art. And what he's trying to balance is trying to have good information that's reasonably accessed up against having such a crowded main page that it would be hard to decipher what's what. And so I think what is likely to happen is that we will, starting tomorrow, work with Mark to have a link off of the main calendar that teachers, that parents and families will go to. They'll go to the main calendar, the events calendar, and then they'll be able to see a link to the sports schedules and to the band schedules, so that folks who are researching, particularly those, as Board Member Guglielmi points out, who might be new to the high school, let's say, or just new to the district, who would maybe intuitively go to that site and then not readily see it now, will more likely see it. So I'm going to be working with Mark Merrifield over the next couple of days and hopefully have an improvement for communication off of Board Member Guglielmi's suggestion. So,
Cinda?
Assistant Superintendent McLaughlin and I spoke today, and one other thing that I asked, I know he'll be working on it and probably have more updates for us. We have now time. I think this ship has sailed pretty much for this summer, but as we approach the calendar going into the next year, there might be more opportunities for efficiencies perhaps. But one thing I did suggest is, even with the constraint of, understanding there is a problem that we don't always know who's going to be the coach, and therefore putting constraints around when summer tryouts might make it a coach that might be a viable option, not be a coach in certain situations. But I think that's less of the norm than the reality. So one thing I had asked about was, can we have perhaps is it something that our athletic director can commit to, is a date in which no practices would be before? Could you say by August 14th there will not be any, tryouts? There will not be tryouts prior to X date, or, are there any parameters that we can put around it? Because at the end of the day, I think parents start to book their vacations relatively early, and they just want to know what their time slots are to be able to do that. And it could be summer camps, it could be vacations, whatever the summer plans are. And I feel like the more transparent we can be and the more visibility we can provide into what those summer schedules might look like, I think the better it is for our students, our student community.
Okay. Any other comments? I've got a couple, actually. The first is I want to thank John Fabrizio for extending himself to the Kearsarge School District. They were looking at resources in our mental health, basically on areas where our mental health committee is already working, and he has offered a branch of just resource to be able to get them off the ground. And what we're doing, a lot of the things that they're focusing on right now are things we've been focusing on for a couple of years, and he's been a very good open door for them to be able to get some basic ideas going, and resources for funding as well. So I thank him for taking that time with Kearsarge, another district in our state that needs some support. And finally, 3 years ago, we had a new scribe. And Rose DiNucci joined us July 15th, 2015. And I'm going to get misty. I do it every time. But you do incredible work. You're such a warm and friendly face. And our town is so much better off for knowing what we're doing as a board because of the notes you take and the information that you deliver. It's exemplary work, and we're going to miss you so very much. So, as a token of appreciation, we did get you a card and a little gift. So thank you. And this is why I do this at the end of the meeting, so I'm Misty off camera. So, so on that is, we'll go on to item number 13. Is there any new business from the board? Seeing none, any committee reports? Andy?
So I don't have them often, but last week both or two of my committee assignments happened on the same day right after the other. So first on the 11th, the Ceres Board of Directors met. It was sort of a landmark day because the current model of Ceres, where it is a membership based on school districts in the southern region, ceased. It had its last meeting, and the standing board of directors approved new bylaws, and then we voted in a new board of directors, which is now based off of memberships at large, not necessarily associated with school districts, but rather to allow Ceres to be a sort of autonomous nonprofit working on educational support that will still provide support and offerings for all the schools in the New Hampshire area. I was nominated and approved to be one of the members of the board of directors moving forward, along with Superintendent Chaffrey. So we're both going to continue for the time being on the board of directors. So we'll see how that goes moving forward. So we'll still talk about it as a committee report, even though it's not really officially tied the way it was, but I think it still benefits the school district to have involvement there. So we'll still do that. And the second meeting was Planning and Building Committee. Two things. Planning and Building Committee, they actually they had a quorum-based meeting, so they had enough to have an official meeting. The first and probably the most important part was I was able to get a preview of the Honeywell sort of proposal that we'll be hearing in July, I believe, at the school board. That talks about all the different schools and where the opportunities are for us to invest, and some of the ideas on what short and long-term investments could be. It was sort of eye-opening in terms of the age of some of the equipment and potentially some of the costs, but also some of the savings and things around ventilation within rooms and things like that across the building. So it'll be a very interesting meeting. I'm sure we'll all take a lot away from that particular one. And then secondly, we talked about the Brentwood building, because we as a board authorized the board chair and myself to sign on I believe July 17th is still the intended closing date, where we will sign papers to take ownership of the building. We shared the results of the engineering study that we saw at the board table last meeting, talked through some of the ideas, and the Planning and Building Committee is setting up a tour of the facility on the 9th of July.
I've learned today that that's not a good date for folks, so we're just going to have to go back and come up with something new.
So either they want to have some sort of a tour through the building before it's closed, but it potentially could be afterwards, after we take possession. We could do it any time at that point. So Planning and Building is real interested in the thoughts that we have as a board have, but they also have their own ideas, of course, that they do. So I'm going to find it very interesting over the coming few months as we sort of grapple forward with Brentwood in terms of what we want to move. So that's it.
Any other committee reports? Seeing none, we will close committee reports, go on to item number 15, which is public comments on agenda items, and the room is empty, so we're going to close that. Take a moment to sign the manifest, and I will entertain a motion to go into non-public session per RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, sections A and C. Do I have a motion? Made by Andy, seconded by Naomi. Naomi, how do you vote?
In favor?
Cinda?
In favor.
Andy?
In favor.
And I vote in favor. The motion carries 4-0-0. Thank you and good night.